Hello everyone, it's very nice to see you here and online too. We officially declare the first day of our healthcare labor market meeting, the week, and we are really pleased to have the first day, the opening day, with our most interesting and very innovative masterclass, which is about biomedical research and AI tools capability for that. We are very pleased to announce that today we will have Avi Steyman. He is an academic language expert, and not only expert in academic language, he is also CEO and founder of the specific special organization, and I would like Avi to talk a bit more about that. But meanwhile, I would like to introduce you with the instructions as we have the hybrid meeting using online Zoom. So we would like to make sure that all of you are well aware of the rules, how to apply your questions, how to answer the questions, and how to communicate in the right way. But let's talk a bit more about the goals and the agenda of our 3-day masterclass. I'll tell you a short story of why I decided that it would be the most important and very interesting, intriguing masterclass for all of you. And the number of registered people for the masterclass proves that there is a high interest in this area. And so first of all, all these weekend events are within the project Education for Better Employment, and that's an internationally funded project. It's World Bank and Innovative Health and the fund which is under the Ministry of Education, and the project it aims to improve our education possibilities to meet the employment goals in healthcare field. So we did the very interesting research, and we found out that research skills are among priority skills for our healthcare specialists. And then we talked and thought, what if we could integrate AI tools in our traditional research methods, because all of us are well aware of traditional research methods, or more or less, let's say so, but we also started using some AI tools for our research. But let's question, do we know everything which is possible to do with AI? Or are we doing them in the right way? What else is possible? That's why we have Avi here to explain first the general introduction, to have a general introduction to AI tools, and then during our consequent 2 days, we will have the opportunity to talk specifically on biomedical research and how AI tools can be integrated in this research process and procedures. So I would like to mention now about how we started. So you have the chat on Zoom for those who are joining us online. You can please let us know if you can hear us. If there is any technical problems, please use chat for that. But we will also have Q&A sessions, and for that sessions you will have specific chat box, like it's called Q&A, and please put your questions and answers also in this area. I Sorry for starting so late, but it's later than never. It's better to have late than never. And yes, Avi, please introduce yourself and also talk a bit more about our sponsor. We have Synapses, the organization which works on AI area, and it's a part of our event as a sponsor.
Thank you, Eka. Good morning, everybody. Really nice to be here. This is my second time here in Tbilisi, and the first time was wonderful. A very warm welcome, so I really enjoy coming here because everyone's very friendly and eager and excited to learn about artificial intelligence. And usually when you do a training or something like a training, it's someone who has a PhD in the field and has been doing it for 30 years, and there's a software that works exactly the way you expect it to work, and then they come in and they train you on how to use it, right? If you're going to use a medical machine or a device, right, there's a manual, and we know exactly how it's supposed to work. That's not what's going to happen over the next 3 days. Artificial intelligence is new, it's dynamic, it changes all of the time, and I know, not from having studied artificial intelligence in university, I'm not a computer scientist, I can't even necessarily explain to you why all the algorithms work in the way they do. What we will be doing over the next 3 days is what I call a boot camp. So a boot camp is where we go in, we experiment, we play around, we test out things, we see what works, we see what doesn't work, and then once we have hands-on experience, then we can decide, okay, this is something that I want to include in my research. This is something that I want to add to my lab. This is something that I want to consider in my practice, and these are the things that I don't want to do, that I don't want to use, that are irresponsible. So we're going to look at specific tools, we're going to look at use cases, and we're also going to look at responsible and irresponsible use of AI. And if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Okay, thank you very much to Eka, thank you to Ilya State, thank you to everyone for taking the time to come out. I very much hope that by the time the day is finished, you'll say that was a very useful day, but I know that Eka's been working a lot of hours in order to put this all together, and I think everyone sees it here this morning, so quick round of applause for all the organizers and everybody who put this together, because it's really great. Okay, so what I want to go through here with you today, we're going to start off by understanding a little bit about just how artificial intelligence works, and we're going to talk about two different kinds of generative AI, okay? Generally, people throw all of artificial intelligence into one category. That's like me saying to you, is the internet a good place or is it a bad place, right? And you would probably say to me, well, it all depends on what website you go to and how you use it. So that's what we're going to learn about AI today. What are the good uses and what are the bad uses? Sometimes I like to think that people use, they go into ChatGPT, they try something, it doesn't work for them, and they say, no, AI isn't for me because I got bad answer, I got a not truthful answer. And I like to say, that's like using a hammer to bake a cake, okay? It's a very powerful tool, and we want to do something, but maybe it's not the right tool for the job. So we need to figure out what's the right tool for each job. Now, raise of hands just quickly. Who here has never played around with AI before? Great, okay, fantastic, good. I'm glad that everyone has been alive for the last 3 years. Who here uses AI every once in a while but doesn't really use it so much at their job? Raise your hands. Okay, who here uses it at least once a month? Once a week. Once a week, great. And and every day. Okay, fantastic, wonderful, that's great. Well, I'm very happy to see that because you should know that there are plenty of European countries where they're very posh and European countries where the people are not experimenting the same way you are. So good for you. You're going to be ahead. You're going to be ahead of the curve. That's a good sign. Okay, fantastic. And it also means that we can kind of like, you'll know a lot about what I'm talking about. So I won't spend too much time explaining kind of the basic concepts. Okay, to get started here today, what I want you to do is, Eka, I'll ask you for help with this, is I'd like to ask, we're going to go on to ChatGPT just quickly here. By the way, also raise of hand, who here has at least a phone, a tablet, or a laptop that you can use? Okay, so I'm going to be asking you, I'm going to be teaching you different tools, and then I'm going to be asking you to actually try them out. So be ready to work and have things open. You know, some of the tools will require simple registration, so we'll give you time to do that. Okay, I want to start off just with a quick warm-up exercise here, and I want to ask, yes, please.
So you can use Ilya Uni Wi-Fi. It's open and disconnect to Wi-Fi.
Right, correct, yes, thank you. Oh yes, and a special thank you to our sponsor Synapse. We're going to be learning Synapse in a little bit later on today. Synapse is a really great tool to help with what I call research intelligence, okay? So it's actually very kind of high level decision making and processing of data. We're going to be seeing how to do that through Synapse, so thank you to them for helping to make this possible. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is we're going to go around the room, and I apologize to the people on Zoom. We don't have time to have everyone on Zoom, but I want to go around the room and very quickly, okay, because I know that I don't want to waste time, I want everyone to say one word, okay, only one word, that represents your feeling about artificial intelligence and healthcare. Okay, so it could be scared, it could be excited, it could be, novel, right? So one word. That's it. Okay, and then we're going to do a quick exercise with ChatGPT. So give me a second here. Okay, so, I want to start us off? Innovation. Okay, you know what? I'm going to give you the microphone and I'll type while everyone, you can pass the microphone around.
Okay, thanks. I think innovation.
Innovation, great.
Help.
Help. Great.
For me, it's friendly.
Friendly. Excellent.
I will say curiosity.
Great.
Assistant.
Assistant.
Science.
Advanced innovation.
Analysis.
Novelty.
Planning.
Quick overview. Overview.
Important.
Promising.
Inevitable.
Powerful. Simple. Risky.
So brainstorming.
Brainstorming.
Useful. Novelty. Time saving. Assisting.
Time saving was already said, so I will say like optimization of simple processes, time consuming and this kind of process.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Becca. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you everybody. Fantastic. And what I've done here, as you may have seen, as I wrote a prompt for ChatGPT. We'll talk a little bit later how to write a good prompt. This wasn't even necessarily a good prompt. It was just a very simple prompt. And I asked it to run a sentiment analysis. Okay, let's get a feel for the room here today. How are we feeling around AI? You know, right? That's the first question when a patient comes in. We ask, right, what brings you here today, right? How are we feeling about being here today? And it can do, and what we get here is a very interesting sentiment analysis. Now, it's broken down the words into positive, neutral, and negative, right? As we would do in a sentiment analysis. Of course, we need to look over its answer, right? Anyone who's used ChatGPT knows we never trust blindly. Okay, but we see here that positive includes innovation, help, friendly, curiosity. I would say that most of you actually today are positive, which again is very interesting because other countries, other lectures that I give, they're not as, right, they're a lot more concerned. So I only heard kind of a few words of negativity, which is risky or simple. And it's broken it down. Now let me ask it to do, you know what, I'm going to say make it more scientific by creating a table. Okay, so one of the things that we can do with ChatGPT, as you probably know, is make it what's called multimodal, which means we can ask it to provide different things for us. We can ask it to break down information in different ways. We can also give it different kinds of information and ask it to break it down in different ways. So we see here that it's broken down into a nice kind of helpful table. If I want, I could go ahead and download this table. And I see here there's positive, there's neutral, and there's potential concerns. Now, maybe I want to turn this into a graph. Okay, and the reason that I'm showing you these just as a warm-up here is because I think sometimes we get into this mindset, or I hear a lot of people saying, yeah, it's very helpful to me to edit my emails, okay? Which is great. There's nothing wrong with editing emails. I'm a big fan of that. But I think that if we're only using AI tools to edit our emails or to write a nice letter to a colleague, we're missing out on a lot of the opportunities and a lot of the potential, right, that AI has. So here I've already asked it to create just a very simple bar chart, which, by the way, how long would this have taken me had I had to do it on my own? I'm not great with Excel, maybe the Excel wizards here, right? But all of a sudden within, how many, right, 30 seconds, I've already got exactly what I want to do. And this is just the beginning, right? You can do a lot more sophisticated things. So what I'm going to ask from all of you, whether you are positive or negative or neutral, it doesn't matter. And by the way, we all have feelings of everything, right? I'm sure we've all had moments where we say, oh my God, this is amazing, it's the future. And we've all had moments where we said, this is the dumbest tool I've ever worked with. I can't believe that I can't believe I work with it. One of the examples I like to give is someone was posting how they asked it they asked GPT how many R's are there in the word strawberry, and it couldn't figure it out. It said 5, and then it said 10, and then it said 1, and it's like, well, what happened, right? You could do the most complicated, complex, and we'll talk about why that is, right? But just for starters, and of course, when we're reviewing this, right, what I want you to think about is not just what cute things can you do, but what things can actually help you in a professional setting to make your work better, to make your work more enjoyable, and to really kind of supercharge what it is that you're doing. Okay, so what I would like to do now is I'd like to start with our first session today. Let me try and take this clicker and see if I can work it out this way. All right, and no. Am I doing it wrong? I can do it from here. It's not a big deal. Let's see, or maybe because I'm not presenting in present mode. There we go. Okay, all good. That was a human error, not an artificial intelligence error. And by the way, I said it as a joke, but a lot of times when we don't get the answer that we want, right, or we get something that's wrong, so we should ask ourselves not, does this tool know how to do it or not, okay? Sometimes there are things the tool just doesn't know how to do. That's also possible. But oftentimes it's that we're not prompting properly. So people always ask me, Avi, which tool should I be using? Should I be using ChatGPT? Should I be using Claude? Should I be using Gemini? Should I be using Microsoft Copilot? And I always tell, and we'll talk about the differences between the different tools. But what I always tell people is it's a lot more important how you interact with the tool than which tool you choose. So how you prompt and what you ask it to do and understanding its limitations and its abilities is a lot more important than deciding which model exactly I'm going to use. And don't worry, because whatever model you choose, in 10 minutes there'll be a new model out, so I don't get too excited about exactly which model and how it works. Okay, so just a little bit about myself, just by way of introduction. I'm Avi, I live in Israel, and I am the CEO of a company called Academic Language Experts. I've got a bit of material that I'll share with you later that you can take home with you. Traditionally, right, since 2014, I run what's called an author services company. So we help researchers, we help research institutions, we help also pharma with everything having to do with grant proposals. So applying for competitive grant funding, whether that's the ERC or local funding. So we help researchers in that way. And also everything that has to do with academic publication. So publishing your research in a peer-reviewed journal, making sure that it's up to standards, trying to get into the top journals. That's kind of what we help do. And in November 2022, along with everybody else, I started experimenting with ChatGPT, and my jaw dropped because I said, this is going to totally directly impact my business, because a lot of the business that we do is around writing and translation and editing and language services. And I said, and all of a sudden I started using it and realized, wow, this is going to be a major game changer. So the first month I was just, depressed and didn't know what I was going to do, right? What are we going to do with the company, with all the employees? Thank God I can tell you that it's been okay. There's still a lot of room for humans in the loop, as we like to say. But I said, okay, if you can't beat them, you join them, right? If you can't, right? Let me see, let me understand, let me learn. But I wasn't just interested in learning in general. I was interested, how is this going to impact researchers? Because researchers or people who deal with research or healthcare providers, we can't just take any solution and plug it in, right? We're not okay with a 95% success rate, right? If you went into a surgery and they said this guy's great, right? He has a 95% success rate. 5 people die on the table, right? But the other 95 are okay. We would say no, thank you, right? We'll go find somebody else. So we're a little bit different than your average, let's say, user or your average user of ChatGPT. So it's important to understand exactly how we use it for researchers. That's what I did a deep dive into. I said, not only what are the general tools out there and how can we use them, but what are the tools that are made for us, that are made for people who have no tolerance for mistakes and errors, right? How do we use those? In addition, I also put together the largest AI tools training in the world for researchers. We just finished off. It was 6,500 people, researchers and professionals from around the world came together online for a series of meetings on Zoom, where we taught a lot of what we're going to teach today. So you'll learn exactly what, or more even than what we learned there. But it was great because it was people from 142 different countries came together and learned about AI, and we're all experimenting together. Even, like I said, I'm the trainer, okay, because I spend a lot of time working with these tools, but oftentimes I learn from people who have practiced and found out new ways to use these tools. So don't hesitate to share your experiences as well. And also the other thing I'll mention here in this context is that I am a core member of a consortium called Kangaroo. It does not have to do with the animal. It is a group that includes researchers, healthcare companies, publishers, funders. We all get together to discuss responsible policy around responsible AI use in research. So come up with guidelines and understandings of how could we use it responsibly. Unfortunately, it's very slow moving. So by the time they put out policy, it's usually outdated. Because the AI tools move so fast. But it's good to be part of that because it kind of gives me perspective on what are some of the challenges that different stakeholders are facing and how do we make sure that we're using it in a responsible manner. And hopefully I'm able to contribute to that as well. Anyone who wants to connect, by the way, and first of all, you're welcome to come up during a break, but also on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. There's a lot of really interesting conversations that are happening on my page around AI tools and research, so you're welcome to connect there. Okay, so let's get right into it. Here's a map which makes people dizzy. Okay, it's very overwhelming. But this is a mapping that was done by my friend, my colleague, Daniela Duca, who used to be at Sage Publishers. And she said, okay, let me see if I can map the AI tools for researchers onto a page, and this is what she came up with. And as you can see here, there's all sorts of different tools for all sorts of different purposes. Okay, so you can see here, we've got analysis, literature review, you've got writing, you've got, all sorts of different kind of use cases for artificial intelligence and different tools. So oftentimes, when we think of AI, we think of ChatGPT, which is fine. ChatGPT is a very powerful tool. We're going to learn how to use it properly until later today. But it's also important to realize that sometimes ChatGPT is actually the worst tool you can use. So let me give you an example. If you're trying to do a literature review, okay, now maybe you have done this before, and you ask ChatGPT for reliable sources, at least until a couple weeks ago, it could easily make up stuff. Okay, make up stuff that doesn't exist, give you facts that aren't facts, not get you to the main literature that you need in order to make intelligent decisions. So that's the example of the hammer making a cake. It's a really powerful tool. We have an end use case that we want to use, but it's a very bad match. Okay, it's oil and water. Whereas there are other tools that are specifically created by researchers for us, right, that do great literature reviews. So how many people here, for example, are familiar with open evidence? Raise your hand if you're familiar with open evidence. So this is what shocks me, and this is not a fault of your own. I'm not critiquing, God forbid. Open evidence is a tool that was created by the Mayo Clinic, which is based on PubMed, which is for healthcare professionals, okay, which basically gets answers to questions with real sources based on the top academic papers, right? And so what happens a lot of times is people try ChatGPT, they say, no, this is no good, it makes stuff up, and say, right, I'm not going to use it, I'm not going to use artificial intelligence. They never would find out about open evidence, which is an incredible tool, right? So that's why we're here today, and if you're here today, it means that you're open to learning, right? And again, this is going to be, I don't want to show you this so that you feel like, oh gosh, now I need to take a sabbatical, take a year off of my work just so I can study these tools. That's not what I'm saying. I don't know how to use most of these tools. That's a secret, don't tell anybody, right? Most of these tools I'd have to learn from scratch. And why is that not a problem? Because as long as I find one or two tools for literature review, one or two tools for data analysis that work for me, that I'm happy with, great. I don't need to know all of them, okay? And I do my homework and I figure out, right, and I listen to people I respect about which ones are good. So what I like to say is by the time you come out today, it will be like someone who went to the ice cream store and you've tasted a lot of different ice creams. They are all delicious, right? If you could, you'd have all of them, but you come out with a stomachache. Okay, so why do I say that? Because we're going to be trying different tools. You might come out a bit overwhelmed and say, oh my God, right? There's so much to learn, there's so much out there. That's okay. The goal here today is not because it is a master class, that's true, but we're not going to all master all the tools after one day. It's a very big world. So what is important though, what I would say is important, is for you to ask yourself, where do I need the most help? What's the most challenging for me? Or maybe not for me, maybe for my department, or maybe for my institution. Where are we lagging behind? What are our KPIs? What are our goals for this year? And which of these categories, before we get into specific tools, which of these types of tools would help us to make the next level? How do we make up the gap with some of our competitors, right? Those are kind of the questions that I like to ask when it comes to the use of these tools. Okay, so in order to, let's start by understanding exactly how these large language models, or what we like to call frontier models. The first category of what we're going to talk about today, of generative AI, are what are called frontier models. What are the frontier models? These are the big companies, okay? So this is the ChatGPT, which is created by OpenAI. This is Claude, which is created by Anthropic. This is Microsoft Copilot, right? Obviously Microsoft, which is also connected to OpenAI. This is Gemini, which is Google's tool, right? As you all see, there's a big war out there right now to be the tool. So far, it's interesting. No one's won. Everyone's kind of, it's like an F1 race, right? Someone's ahead, and then they blow out a tire, and then someone else gets ahead, and then, right? So they're all kind of competing, and that, in my opinion, that's good for us, right? As long as they're competing and they keep the tools free or cheap, then we all benefit as a result. The danger comes when one takes over. So how do they do it? Where's all this? How does it work? So in order to understand how these, when very simple question, when I put in a prompt to ChatGPT, what am I getting back? Right? What is this answer that I'm getting? Where does it come from? So the answer is as follows. They basically, all these tools work in a very similar manner. They scoop up, they digest, they index as much content as they possibly can online. They probably got 95% of the, I don't know, no one knows. They know, but no one else knows how much content they got. But let's say they got all of the open available content online, which is the vast majority of content online. Okay, they scooped up into their database, let's call it. Okay, now there are certain things, by the way, they didn't have access to. So anyone have any ideas what they might not have had access to, what they don't have? What? What aren't they? What won't they be able to access? These AI tools.
Whatever is indexed in internet.
Well, that's what they can get. Is anything that's indexed? Sorry. The published research. Correct. So anything that's behind a paywall, right? Anything that's blocked.
This is a big question because that's why this publishers should be responsible to publish all possible research because sometimes it's very expensive and some researchers they have no opportunity to publish, and this means these data they are already lost, right? And because they should have this to take this responsibility to publish all possible research, scientific research, what's already done.
Yeah. So we can have a long conversation today about what you're saying, right? There's a big issue in research.
More responsible data.
There's so essentially on one leg, right? The issue is for many years before open access, before that open access movement came along, it wasn't that hard to publish. Well, it might have been hard to publish, but it wasn't restrictive, right? Anyone could publish from anywhere as long as you had good research, good data. But it was very hard to access, so we couldn't read it unless we had access via the library. Now the open access movement came along and flipped it, right? And said, okay, we'll let everybody read. Reading is great. We want everyone to have access to research, right? We would all agree to that. But what's the flip side? Is that now the researchers are going to have to pay a few $1,000s or a few €1,000 to publish their research. So now that we say, okay, you fixed one problem, you created a whole new problem, right? So that's an issue that definitely is there. We can talk about how that interfaces with AI, but in a very simple, just for now, for understanding the basics, AI takes from any open source. So that's mostly internet, except for published academic research, which is behind a paywall. Okay, if it's open access, they do have it. It has been ingested. And the second thing that they don't have is, let's say, like journalistic content. So sometimes there's news that's behind a paywall as well. Okay, so now what the Washington Post, which is one of the premier newspapers in the United States, two journalists came along and said, let's try and figure out what's in this big database that they have, right? What's in this pool of content that they have. So they tried to reverse engineer ChatGPT, and they came up with the following. They said, first of all, there's a lot of content from a lot of different sources. But here are a few examples of some of the sources that are quite influential. Okay, it could only be, by the way, 1% influence, but even that is quite influential. So let's look at the sources. So first of all, you've got PLOS. Okay, so PLOS, for those who are hopefully you're familiar, it's a open access journal, interdisciplinary, so you can publish in all sorts of different fields. It's actually one of the fastest growing publishers, very reputable, peer-reviewed, everything that we like, right, as scientists. We would go into an article in PLOS and assume that, if we read it critically and it looks correct, right, then it's a good article. So that's great, right? The fact that that's in the database, we're happy about. Now, if we move ahead to the right-hand side, you see that the New York Times was a big part of the database as well, meaning a big part of, again, what they ingested, what OpenAI stole or borrowed, depending on how you look at it, right, in order to create their algorithms, in order to train their algorithms. So the New York Times, okay, it's fact-checked, but it's really editorial, it's really newspaper, right? It's media, it's not so much scientific. So already as scientists, we're like, well, I'm not so sure how to feel about that content. Maybe some of it's better than others. But then you get to the middle and you see that a big part of ChatGPT is actually just Reddit. Okay, if you're familiar with Reddit, Reddit is a platform it's a chat forum where people can go and put up any topic they want and people respond. And there can be good forums out there in Reddit, but a lot of it is misinformation. A lot of it is theories of conspiracy theories or all sorts of interesting stuff that comes on Reddit. Put it this way, it's not where scientists hang out, right, in order to get peer-reviewed, verified scientific information. That's also part of ChatGPT. So every time we're interacting with any of the, by the way, this isn't just ChatGPT, this is any of the big models. Anytime we're interacting with Copilot, with GPT, with Claude, with Gemini, we need to remember it's what I like to call a polluted data set. Imagine you were doing a data analysis on a data set that you can't trust. That's what we're doing with ChatGPT. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. We're going to learn. There's a lot of value we can get out of ChatGPT still. But in terms of scientific truth, the same way you wouldn't go to Reddit to look for scientific truth, I wouldn't go to any of these frontier models. Okay? There are other tools that are excellent that we will learn that can be trusted. Okay? So that's the first thing to understand, is that the sources of data influence the outputs. By the way, I've been promoting within publishers, I've been talking to publishers and saying to them, why don't you create your own large language model just based on your content, and then we can get real answers, then we can get better answers. Publishers are very old-fashioned. It takes them a while to adjust. Okay, so now let's understand exactly how these large language models work. Okay, once we understand how they work, then we can get a better understanding of, should I use them? Should I not use them? And the answer will always be, depends on the case, depends on what we're trying to do. Sometimes it's a great use, sometimes it's a terrible use. So let's understand. So I'm going to get a little bit technical here, and if you want me to repeat it, I'm happy to repeat it, but it's important for understanding. Essentially, the way that these models work, they've eaten up all this content, right? That's what we said in the previous slide, from all sorts of sources, who knows where, okay? And what they're doing, what it does is, behind the scenes, is it's looking for patterns between words, okay? It's not looking for facts and fiction. It actually has no idea what's true and what's not true. It's a language model. It is a language tool. Sometimes we forget about that because we use it like Wikipedia. We say, who was the first Georgian prime minister and when were they born? That's not a great question for ChatGPT. Why? Because it is a language model. It is trying to do language activity. So what I mean by that is, it's eaten up all of this content from PLOS, from New York Times, right? And it has ingested all that content, and then it says, what can I learn about connections between words, or similarities between words, or between paragraphs? So I'll give you an example. I might write, it looks through all the content that it's indexed, and it might say, you know what, I see that the words research and the word academic, researcher and academic, are oftentimes used within close proximity to each other. Okay, very simple example. So I know that those two words are related. Now, how do I know that? Because it's read millions and millions and millions of pages, and in those millions and millions of pages, the words academic and researcher appear in closer proximity to each other than the word researcher and football. Okay, so it knows there's a closer semantic relationship between researcher and academic than between researcher and football. Okay, it's learned something. I'll give you another example, which isn't as successful. It may read through all the content online, again, without differentiating between academic content and non-academic content. It may say, I see that there's autism, the word autism, and the word vaccines often appear together. Now, I assume that, those of us in this room know there is no scientific, that's been debunked. There was an article back in the 70s, that's since been retracted. We know there isn't a scientific connection between autism and vaccines. But it doesn't know that because it just knows what the majority of the content online says, okay? And the majority of content online could say, vaccines cause autism. And then you might come along and say, do vaccines cause autism? And he says, yeah, of course they do. Why? Because there's a semantic, there's a language relationship between those words. And it has learned over time that there's this connection. Okay? Now, the hope is, so essentially when we're asking GPT a question, we're hoping that the consensus of the majority, or the average, the mean of human knowledge gives us the right answer, which, by the way, oftentimes it does. That's what's so frustrating about it, is that oftentimes we do get the right answer, and then we say, why does it lie to me, right? It's like a very abusive partner. Sometimes it is loving and caring, and we think they love us, and then the next day they just lie behind our back, and right, we're like, what happened? Either be always lie or never lie, right? So the answer is that it's giving you the average mean answer to a question based on all the content that it's learned across all of its sources. But again, the sources can't necessarily be trusted. So sometimes we get right answers, sometimes we get wrong answers. Sometimes we get what I call partial answers. So it's kind of giving me an answer to a question, but it may not have included a really important component that I need to know about. Okay? So that's kind of how these frontier models work. Okay? The way I like to think about it, just in one picture, it's a word salad. Okay? I've taken all the words in the world, I've mixed them up into a big salad. Okay? I've understood, in this example, health and nutrition and freshness. Those are words that kind of go together. So the next time someone asks me for tips for healthy living, it'll say, well, you need to eat fresh food and you need to be nutritious. Why? Because it learned those words go along. That's what it is. Now that sounds pretty dumb, and you'll ask yourself, so what's the point of this, right? What's incredible is actually when you can do this at scale, with the computing power put behind the GPUs that are behind some of these tools, it actually can do some pretty incredible things, and we'll see. Okay, but it's not great for answering scientific questions. So how do we get it to be better? Right? How do we make sure we get good answers and we don't just get rubbish answers? And the answer to that question is always giving additional context or additional details, additional information to help it do a better job of answering our question. And in this way, it's actually very similar to humans, right? So I'll give you an example. I want you to complete my sentence, okay? Complete my sentence. They. Right, you're probably thinking to yourselves, there's no way for you to know what I'm thinking, right? Because right, there's billions of possibilities, right? We could continue that right sentence in so many different ways. It's impossible. That's what I like to call, that's kind of like a bad prompt or a generic prompt, right? I don't know what it is. So I give this example, by the way, with translate. Sometimes people get frustrated. Sometimes people ask, translate from Georgian to English. Well, who's it for? And what's the purpose of it? And what style do you want? And should it be more marketing copy or should it be more scientific language? Do you want it to stick very strictly? Is it a survey where the translation must be exactly right the way it is and we need to do a back translation? It's a very regimented process. Or are you saying, adapt this to a different culture and talk in their language, right? So that's an example of like a very kind of what I would call a bad prompt or a weak prompt. If I say to you, if I give you a sentence, they wanted to go to the park even though it was raining. Now complete my sentence, okay? Raining today, raining outside, raining in the park. There are still possibilities, but the total number of possible normal completions to my sentence is limited. You'd probably be able to get it within a few minutes. Why? Because I gave you more context. I gave you more information. Now think about that times 50, times 100, times 1,000 when it comes to ChatGPT. The more context I can give, the more information I can give, the better job it will do answering my question. So again, it's not always about which tool I use, it's a lot more about how I use it. Now, some of the just common misconceptions around GPT. So sometimes people use it like Wikipedia. As I mentioned, don't suggest to use it that way. It is a creative tool. One person who here said brainstorming earlier? Someone said brainstorming as their word. So I'm gonna talk about that word a lot. I love using GPT as a creative partner. Okay? If we're all sitting around in a room and I say we're gonna do a brainstorming exercise right now, we have a challenge. How do we promote local Georgian innovation within the EU? Okay, and everyone's gonna throw out their answers. Okay, let's say we were to do that right now. Probably most of the answers we wouldn't act on. There might even be some dumb answers, okay? Or some like not creative answers, or things that have already been tried. But we're brainstorming. So the goal here is not for every single last answer to be brilliant or to be perfect. The goal here is to try and think out of the box, or come up with new ideas, or be able to phrase things in a new way. That's how I like to think about ChatGPT. And all the other frontier models, by the way. It's a way for us to help us think out of the box, to help us solve problems. Okay? But it doesn't necessarily always give me the right answer. I am still the one in control. I actually have a lot of response. Sometimes I like to think I have more responsibility, right? Because I'm the one who has to look through and decide, is this right or is this wrong? Can I use it? Can I not use it? So some people are afraid, oh, this is going to take our jobs, right? And I always say, actually, anyone who plays around with GPT or different tools a lot realizes how valuable we actually really are, right? Because if you would let GPT just automate, right? If you just let it go, right? Just let it do its thing and just, right? The GPT will go in with the patient. We would have killed half the patients in Georgia by now, right? If we would have done that, right? So I think we understand, everyone who's used it understands the limitations and how we need to interact with it. It's what I call augmented use. Augmented use means we need to ask ourselves, where does the technology excel? Where do we excel? And how does that fit together? Those aren't easy questions. Okay, that means we need to understand ourselves. We need to be honest about what our, I hate to say it this way, but what's the added value of us as humans, right? What do we bring to the table that the AI doesn't? And what does the AI bring to the table that we can't? So for example, AI can be really good if, I don't know, I've got this, I have a library full of, 100 articles, and I can't for the life of me, I remember this, data point from this one article, I can't remember where it is. Now, for a human to do that process would take, a couple weeks. For AI, it can be within seconds. Another example, I can even show you if you're interested. Are there any biologists in the room? No biologists. Okay. All right. So AI, for example, does a much better job than humans at being able to detect images that have issues, that have been cropped improperly, that have been manipulated, that have been also AI-generated images, whereas the human eye can't see those things. So there are certain activities where it's much better. Okay. The last thing that I want to mention here on this slide is, and also we like to think of frontier models, of generative AI models as like, as kind of like a technology, right? When we use a technology, it's usually very binary. Something works or it doesn't work. Okay? I flip on the light switch, it either goes on or it doesn't, right? I put on I turn on my phone, right? It's charged or it's not charged. With AI, it's actually, I like to think about it a lot less like a traditional technology, a lot more like an artist. I give it colors, I give it a canvas every morning, and every morning the artist gives me back a different painting. What do you mean? I gave you the same tools, right? Give me the same thing, be consistent. That's not how it works. So it's a lot more like an artist and a lot less like a traditional technology. The last thing I just want to mention in parentheses is around AI detection, because I get that question a lot. Right? If I use AI, people are going to know, and then I'm going to get in trouble, and then to the best of my, and we'll talk about responsible AI use and how we report when we use AI and how we can be transparent about it. To the best of my understanding and knowledge, there is currently no tool that can be accurately be relied upon to detect AI writing. So if any of you are in teaching positions where you've got students, who are using it, and you say, well, maybe I can check if they used it or not. Or if you're using AI in different ways, I don't think, right now it's not currently detectable. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you can't sometimes read it and be like, oh, this sounds like it was AI written, right? But it does mean that we're, that we shouldn't be trying to play this game, at least in my opinion, of, well, let's find out who used it and get them in trouble. Okay, I think we should embrace it, but embrace responsible use of these tools. Okay. Now, I think what frustrates us about these frontier models is, like I said before, why are you lying to me, right? Why can't you just tell me the truth, right? I asked you a question, give me an answer. Why are you pretending to know? Tell me if you don't know, right? Why are you pretending to know something you don't? So we have to be very, almost schizophrenic in our use, because we need to understand that it can be a very transformative, incredibly powerful tool. On the other hand, we have to be skeptical of every single output that we get. That's a weird thing, right? It's like, human, right? When there's someone we really respect that has a lot of knowledge, we eventually trust them. We should never trust, okay? At least not trust blindly. And we need to understand that it all depends on which tasks, which use cases. For certain things it's great, for certain things it's really terrible. So now what I want to do for the next few minutes is I want to go through, we're going to have 2 slides, working with AI like a genius and working with AI like an idiot, okay? And what I want to do after we go through these 2 slides is I want to give you time, okay, to actually go into ChatGPT or whatever tool that you prefer to use, excuse me, and I want you to try and use AI like a genius. Now, you don't need to do all of these things. These are 8 different examples of really powerful use cases where I say GPT can be a game changer. Even though it's based on Reddit and even with all the problems and even though it lies to me, these are excellent use cases. These are things that work well, that I've tested, that I've practiced over and over and over. Okay, we'll also look at things that are really terrible ideas, and you might say to yourself, oh wow, I've been doing some of those idiotic, right, use cases. Because again, it's all about how we use it in the right way. So let's go through some of the examples. You know what, even before we do that, I'm gonna ask you, is there anyone here who can tell me a use case, okay, something you've done with one of the generative AI models that's worked really well for you? Or something that you do on an ongoing basis, so you say, this action that I take is really helpful. Yeah? Yeah.
I give some PowerPoints if I just skip my lectures and it explains me very well.
So you give it PowerPoints that you've created or that your teacher has given you? That your teacher gave you and it explains it to you. Excellent. That's a fantastic use case. We'll see why in a minute. Yeah. What else? There was someone else who, yeah.
I'm taking from your previous slide, but it helps with this writer's block. Like whenever you are up to continue, it just gives you ideas, you read, you take 10% of them, but it's like additional, like very short, very intensive dialogue, but it kind of gives you right direction.
Excellent.
You can drop off 90% of it, but 10% of it, oh wow, I forgot it. So.
Yeah, writer's block is a big issue. Writer's block might be ancient history, right? Because the whole idea of writer's block is I can't figure out how to just get a sentence together. It helps me get those first few sentences. By the way, I find when I have writer's block and I use GPT, most of the time I don't actually use whatever GPT suggested to me, but sometimes from understanding, no, it's not that, but that helps me clarify what I do want to write, and then it's a back and forth. Which is, by the way, funny because I'm very active in the community, the publisher community. And they always try to make, what they try to say is, well, you can use AI for editing. A lot of them have said this to me. We don't mind if people use it for editing and proofreading, but we don't like using it for writing. And what I always say back to them is, you don't understand how people are using these tools. It's a circular process. I write, I edit, I revise, I then rewrite, right? It's not a linear, I write everything, and then I edit everything, right? I'm constantly in dialogue. It's like having a personal assistant with me that I'm like speaking through the ideas with. So this kind of, it's very old-fashioned. It's like, first I write, then I edit, then I revise, right? We're in a very different world now. I don't think that the publishers really understand that, but I try to explain that to them. There was one other hand raised.
In most cases, I'm asking to suggest some kind of things in grammar, for example, how to improve.
Language.
Yes, language.
Now,
especially ChatGPT is more useful in this way.
for sure. So language, again, we said it's a large language model. It's excellent at language, it at least has a lot of potential in language. One example, can someone give me an example of something that they tried and it was a disaster with ChatGPT?
I would say about the language. How can we get rid of GPT using like very fancy, very, how to say, posh language, like some language models, some syntaxes which is not used in daily life. So at least it's a bit more heavier text, and like you try to rewrite it to make it more digestible, more comprehensive, because like there are some words, some verbs, some idioms which like shout, it's GPT.
Yeah.
You shall not
I'll show you a study about that.
The question should be specified. What is your idea? Why you are using it? For scientific way or for just to tell some story? Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's dig into what good use cases and bad use cases are. And I think you've all seen this, but hopefully by having it in front of you, you'll be able to say, okay, next time I have right next time I'm asking myself, can AI do this or can AI not do this? All you need to do is look and see, right, is this here or is it not here? If it's in neither, then let me know and we can think about it together. Okay, so the first rule or the first kind of really brilliant, using AI like a genius is using it as a research assistant with defined materials. So let me explain to you. When you ask, if you would ask the question, what percentage of the Georgian population are above 70 years old? Okay. You would ask that to ChatGPT, I would put money down, you're going to get a wrong answer. Okay? Because it needs to do a number of activities. It needs to find the right source, it needs to understand that source, it needs to give you back the right answer, it needs to understand which sources are reliable, which sources are not reliable. Okay, now let's say I have that data, okay, but it's a huge data set. I've got the data set, okay, of all the entire population and broken down by age groups. If I have that data set and I upload it into GPT, and we'll talk about privacy in a few minutes. I know you're thinking, well, am I allowed to? Well, that's a different topic. Okay, but let's assume for now that we're allowed to, that we have a private server. I upload that information. It gets much, much, much smarter when it has the data, when it has the information, and I am interrogating or querying or asking questions on my own data. So again, it's like a research assistant. If I had a research assistant who was next to me, right, and helping me, I would need to give them the tools, I need to give them the information, the context necessary so that they could go and do the work that they needed to do. Why is that? The reason for that is because as soon as I give it data, as soon as I give it information, basically what I'm saying is mostly ignore everything you know from all the other sources. From PLOS, from Reddit, from the New York Times, all the other places. Focus on what I'm giving you. And I'm going to ask questions about that. So what it does is it actually shrinks its kind of thinking to that specific data set, or a number of papers. You can upload multiple papers. Or you can copy and paste in text. That's also fine. And then the number of hallucinations or misinformation goes way down because it's not getting information from the World Wide Web. It's getting information from you. So again, it's a research assistant. Now, this only works obviously if we have the data or we have the information available. If it's a question that we have that we don't know the answer to and we need external sources for, then it's a different story. I'm going to teach you a different tool for that. Okay? So again, let's not get confused. Let's distinguish between I have the information, I can give it to GPT, great. I don't have any information, I need to get from external sources, bad use. Okay, number 2, reformulate or rewriting text. So the example, right, we had an example here of PowerPoint slides, right? Get PowerPoint slides in class. I don't really understand, maybe the teacher is a bad teacher, right? They spoke too quickly, I didn't understand what was going on, or I want to review. So I can take PowerPoint slides and I can actually say now explain them to me in Georgian as if I'm a 6th grader. Okay, you can do that. I've asked GPT to explain to me theoretical physics as if I was a 6th grader. First time in my life that I've understood it. Okay, because it has the ability to kind of customize it for me. Now, so that's, and by the way, I also do it in the opposite direction. I had slides. I was asked to write an article in Science Editor, which is a scientific journal about editing. And I didn't really have time, but I knew there was something that I felt I wanted to write for a long time about how I see how policies should be made, how journals should make policies around the use of AI writing. So I was like, you know what, I gotta write this. I don't have time to do it. I had slides from a conference that I presented at. I took those slides. I said, here's the slides. Here is the journal guidelines. Write me a first draft of my article based on my slides and the journal guidelines. Now, was it perfect? No. Did I have to do work on it afterwards? Yes. Do I think that it saved me a lot of time? Yes, because I wasn't asking it to write from scratch. I was asking it to take these information pieces, synthesize them, integrate them, and then write me something new. That worked quite well. Okay, another language capability, translation, transcription, editing. These are all examples of, they're a little bit different from each other, but all examples of language. So if any of you here do qualitative research, any qualitative folks in the, okay. AI can do a pretty good job at transcribing interviews. So for any of you who have sat for days on end, either paid a lot of money to someone to transcribe or sat for days on end transcribing, those days are basically gone. Okay, and it does a pretty good job. Again, do I trust it blindly? Don't even check? No. I always check. I read through the same way I would if I got it back from somebody else, same way I proof myself. Of course, I also, when I'm reading through, I understand certain things about what the interview said. I pick up on themes, right? Not saying that we stop doing research the way that we always did it, but there are incredible things you can do with it, translation as well. The next example that I like to give is low-risk summarizing of mass materials. So let me explain what I mean by this. Let's say, this is kind of the example that I gave before, where I have 100 articles, and I remember I needed this data point, I can't remember where to find it. Or, let's say I've got 2 weeks, a 2-week deadline, to deliver a report on, what the latest research on new devices for colon cancer is. I'm just throwing out a random example. Now, and I do a quick literature search in Google Scholar, or maybe some of the tools we'll learn later. We'll learn on Wednesday, and I see, actually, there's 100 articles. Now, there's no way I'm reading 100 articles. Like, I just don't have time. I can't, right? So what do? So traditionally, you probably would have read through the abstracts of those articles and said, okay, how do I narrow it down? What's going to be most relevant to me? With AI, what I can do is I can say, okay, go through these articles and tell me which ones, in a very sophisticated way, summarize the main methodologies, right? What are the main methods across these articles that were used in these papers? You can do a pretty good job of that, okay? Because again, it has the information, it has the source. I've given it a very specific prompt or a very specific task, so it knows how to search that and do it. Because again, I'm not asking it for information that in its database, I'm asking it for information that I'm giving it. Okay, the next example is exactly what was said here before. To get past brain freeze, or right, I just don't know how to write. I just don't know how to start this discussion. Right? Okay, I have the results. I don't really understand what is the significance of these results. By the way, if a technique that I like to use, instead of just saying write me a paragraph or a discussion, what I like to do is actually start a step earlier and say, give me 5 unique, 5 interesting, novel, things from this data set that you think are significant. I will then go through those. Oftentimes, by the way, 3 or 4 of them, not so significant, not so interesting, but I might find one that's really interesting that I didn't think about. Then I'll say, okay, based on that, write me an outline for a discussion, and now write me a discussion. Okay, so there's a process that I go through with it in order to get over my writer's block. By the way, if sometimes it's enough that I do that first stage, and then it's like, okay, now I'm good to go, right? Now I don't have any issues. Number 6, when variance is a plus. So let me explain what I mean by that. There are times in science where I need to be very exact, very specific. I can't say, well, the answer is one of these 5 things. Okay, that wouldn't be good, right? The answer has to be the answer. Right, the stats have to be the stats. But there are times, like I said, where we're brainstorming, where we're thinking out of the box, where we're trying to understand significance of results, where maybe there are 5 different, or 10, or 20 different ways of understanding, right, how, or different correlations, or, right, within a data set. In that way, having numerous multiple answers, or numerous multiple approaches, is a positive. I don't want to get stuck in my tunnel vision that, these results mean X. These results can mean a number of different things, right? And there may be, right? Especially again, I'm going back to this example of the data. If I have a data set and there's there might be a question about gender, question about age, socioeconomic status. I may not have even thought at the beginning. Well, actually, what I didn't realize is older women in this part of the country are actually suffering from this disease. I never would have even come up with that. Okay. And those things can be done with GPT. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm trusting it blindly and now I'm going to publish an article without having checked whether it's accurate or not. It means that there's a positive in the fact that it's giving me multiple answers, or a creativity in answers. Another example is coding. So if any of you here do program, it could do a really good job of programming. Big fan of using AI for programming. That's not, by the way, just to explain, you might say, well, doesn't it need to be very exact? Isn't that a bad use case? So the answer is that it can do, because there's so much data within its data of good code. Most code is at least okay, that it kind of ingested into its data set. There's not a lot of conspiracy theory code out there, right? Most of the code is is solid, the open source code, it can do a pretty good job of giving me baseline code for different programs I want to run. And then obviously I need to go through it, I need to fix it, but I know programmers are already using it very heavily. And finally is as a reviewer in any sort of context. You've written a report, you've written a peer-reviewed article, you've written a clinical trial, have it be your reviewer. So how do you do that? You upload your draft, you upload the kind of review criteria, okay? The evaluation criteria, a new grant that you're applying for. You say, be my reviewer too, right? Criticize this, improve it. How can I make it better? And you may actually be able to come across, it may give you, again, will every idea it gives you be perfect? Probably not. You're the boss, you're in charge, okay? It's your responsibility as well. But it will give you some feedback that you might not have been able to get otherwise. Or that maybe your article would have been rejected because the reviewers would have come across this. And now all of a sudden you've caught it earlier. So that's 8 examples of really good use cases, okay? Now I want to get into some of the bad use cases. I'll give you time to experiment and then we'll take a break, okay? Or unless you want to, yes, do we have questions on the chat?
Yeah, so one comment was about transcribing and translation. So we found it's very difficult to have in Georgian language. So do you have any comment on that?
Yes, I can show you, I won't do it now, but remind me and I will show you a prompt. So one of the things we do at Academic Language Experts is translation. It's one of our main services that we provide. We worked for many, many months on coming up with a good prompt and tweaking it and improving it. So I'll try and remind me and I'll show you the prompts of exactly how we did it. Just to give away kind of the secret sauce, there's a lot of different components to the prompt. What's very important is defining exactly what the purpose of the translation is, as well as giving it examples. We found that giving it examples. Sorry? Transcription also? Okay, so I'll go through that, no problem. Okay, and then finally, so we said a reviewer on existing work. Okay, now, excuse me. How do we use AI let's not use AI like an idiot, but what are some of the idiotic ways to use AI? Things I don't recommend, things I don't suggest, things I've done, okay? And I think many of us have done. It's not, again, we're all learning here. It didn't come with a manual. I think even the people who built it didn't even know what kind of creature they were creating when they created it. So it's very different than like a normal tool where we come in, we understand how to use it and we use it. This was kind of like we learned through trial and error, and understanding these things did not work well. So number 1 is, as we said, questions about the wider world. So asking it factual questions, right? It may get the right answer. Again, I'm not saying that it will always lie to you, right? It may have enough information in its database about the first Georgian prime minister because of Wikipedia and because of that it might give you a very good answer. But once you start getting into questions that don't have so much publicly available data and information, and by the way, that's good to know also. Think about your own field or your own area. How much publicly available data is there out there online? Okay, the less available data, the worse your answers are going to get. Okay, so if you're very niche, that's why researchers a lot of times struggle because they'll ask questions and they'll be like, right, where's this answer from? Maybe it's only from 2 or 3 articles. Maybe some of the articles are behind paywalls and there's not that much publicly available information, right? If it's questions that are very again, like the first Georgian prime minister, there it's a little bit easier, right? Because there's so much publicly available information, we assume the majority of the sites out there are not making stuff up. There may be a few weird, bloggers out there, but they don't influence the total algorithm in a significant way. Number 2 is when it's hard to identify errors. So it is, I would say the number 1 rule of using AI is if you can't tell after you get an output answer, whether it's right or wrong, there's no way, you don't know, and there's no way for you to check, that's a risky behavior. Okay, that's something I don't recommend doing. So if I'm asking questions about a new field, a new area of research that I don't really know, and I'm getting an answer from GPT, I'm like, I don't know, but it says it. That's a problem. Okay, it's not a problem if we have the ability to turn around and say, yes, this is right, no, this is wrong, or at least I can check it. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I can just check quickly and see if it's right or wrong. Right? Or if I take information that I already have and I'm using it in different ways. Just one second. we should ask ourselves if humans would do it better, okay? Or the best, what I like to call the best available human would do it better. Is there a way for me to do this better than I can with GPT in the amount of time that I have available to me, right? Myself or by somebody else? Again, it all depends on the task. So sometimes people will say to me, well, you know, it took me 20 minutes just to get one letter of, you know, a letter of recommendation, right, that I wrote. It took me 20 minutes to get exactly what I wanted GPT. I would have written it in 5 minutes myself. Well then, write it yourself, right? There has to be an ROI. There has to be a return on investment. There has to be something where it's like, this would have taken me 100 hours and now it took me 1 hour, right? That's valuable, right? That's worthwhile. If it's something that, you know, I could have easily done myself, then not necessarily worthwhile. Not critically assessing every output. So if I just take outputs and I assume that every tool is the same, right? And I say, okay, this is what the tool told me, so I'm going to plug it in. That's where you have, that's very risky, right? There's a good chance that, right, especially with the frontier models. Other tools, we can rely upon. And we'll see, we'll learn about those a little bit later. Understanding fact and fiction, right? So understanding, it's very bad at knowing what is true and what is not true. So think about it. It's digested all of this content from the internet, and it doesn't know to tell me the difference between something that's on PLOS and something that's on Reddit. So it may tell, again, it may tell me, using the example I gave before, that yes, there's a connection between autism and vaccines because that's how it understood the materials that it ingested. It doesn't know to say, well, scientifically that's not true. Or I'd even be more controversial. I'd say it doesn't care. Why do I say it doesn't care? Because in theory, OpenAI could have built a tool that was just based on reliable sources. Not only did they not do that, they actually have a licensing agreement with Reddit where every single comment of every single Reddit post goes directly to OpenAI, right? So they don't, clearly it's not what interests them. Now what's interesting also on the flip side is that actually they've started doing licensing agreements also with the academic publishers. So who here publishes academic research from time to time? Okay, your research is probably in the AI tools that we're going to learn. Okay, I don't mean that in a, you know, it is what it is. When we give over our rights and our licenses to the articles that we publish, they're taken by the AI company. Okay, questions about very specific or innovative fields. So that's what I said before. If it's a very niche topic, maybe there isn't so much publicly available information, right? Maybe it's data sets that aren't available online. It will, unfortunately, instead of saying, I don't know, I don't have enough information here to give you an accurate answer, it will, oftentimes hallucinations come to fill in gaps that it doesn't know from its own memory. So it will lie instead of, right? Again, it's the abusive partner. It lies instead of saying, I don't know. So that's where you also need to be aware, is like, when you're asking the question is, if I had someone who could search all the internet, would they be able to find the answer? If the answer is yes, great. If not, then good chance that AI won't be able to answer it either. I don't love using AI, you know, to kind of, for questions that are very heavy or very charged. So things that are very political or culturally controversial, you know, I find it tends to be very politically correct. It'll say, wow, there are very strong opinions on both sides, and you know, everyone needs a voice, and which is fine, but it tends to do that no matter what, you know, kind of controversial question you're asking them. I have heard people have said to me that sometimes it helps them to clarify like an opposing viewpoint. They'll write an opinion, and then they'll say, give me a contrasting opinion, whether that's in the scientific context or, you know, or maybe you're going to make a board presentation, and you're like, you know, tell me why this, you know, I'm proposing a new initiative, right, in the department, and tell me all the questions that I might get to prepare me for the interview, why it might not be, right, why it might not work. That can actually be very helpful, but just don't get too upset about it. If it starts giving you, you know, I've heard people say it's so right wing, it's so left wing, it's so, you know, it's a bit silly in my opinion to take those directions. It's just it's a mirror of the content that's created, right? That's essentially what it is. Things AI are bad at. So we talked before about, you know, counting numbers. It's not great with math. Okay, it's not great with math. At least not for now. Okay, it's getting better. But it's not great with like complex math problems. So just understand what it, right? Because it's a language tool. It's not a math tool. It's very different, right? It's a very different order processing. I and I like to share the example of the lone banana problem. Okay, so the lone banana problem goes as follows. In the beginning of GPT, a few years ago, when you asked it to create a picture of one banana, it was unsuccessful in doing so. It could not create a single banana. As you see here, it would only create multiple bananas. You'd think that's a pretty easy test. Why can't you create more than one banana? Why can't you create one banana? Does anyone have a guess why that might be?
When you get the most picture of bananas, it's so many bananas and not a single banana?
Exactly right, right? So it's all based on the training data, right? So it ingested tons and tons and tons of pictures of bananas. Let's say of all the pictures of bananas, 90% of those bananas were multiple bananas. Okay, so what ends up happening is it says, okay, I understand that a banana is multiple, right? Is many, right? Just like a tree would always have many leaves. You're not going to have a tree with one leaf. Okay? Now, that's what I call a blind spot, right? It's like when we're in our car and there's that area that we can't see. It's a blind spot because it doesn't know that there's such a thing as a single banana. So again, that's why it can be brilliant, but it can also be very dumb at the same time. So be on the lookout. If you say, why doesn't it understand this? Start thinking to yourself, maybe this is based on like something in the training data. Maybe I'm asking it to do something which it wouldn't have been, the average result. And then finally, and this may be the most important, is don't give up on those tasks. This is kind of more of an educational point. Those tasks that make our brains work. So what I mean by that is that there are things that we do in our job which may be hard, maybe we don't love, but they require thinking, and the thinking expands our brains, right? The thinking is part of what, it makes us more creative. It makes us more intuitive. And the danger, I think, the biggest danger in my mind of using AI tools is not so much that we're going to come up with false information, because people will call us out on that, or hopefully we're responsible enough. It's more, do we become lazy as thinkers, okay, as people who are critically analyzing things? And I think we all know in our work, there are things that we do which we call busy work, right, or dumb work, where it's like, it takes up time, we're not using our brains. We know we're not using our brains. And for those tasks, I think it's great, use AI, right? Assuming that we can use it responsibly, like a genius, not like an idiot. But for those tasks where, AI is kind of, where the mental process of going through this is a big part of our understanding of our own growth, of our own development, then I think it's really a shame to be using AI, because we're giving up on an opportunity, right, for us to learn. It's not like if we use AI and get the right results, our brains grow, right? It doesn't work that way. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is, I'd like everyone to spend the next 10 minutes, go into ChatGPT, okay? And I want you to think of something in your work, okay? Something that you do on a daily or weekly basis. I want it to be something that's annoying, okay? Something that you don't love doing, something that's a bottleneck, that's preventing you from getting to the next stage. But try and make it something that's a genius way of using AI, not an idiot way of using AI. Okay, and see if you can think about what materials you might need to feed it, right? What background information it might need in order to be successful at the task. Feed it that information, okay? And then see if you can work with it to accomplish your task, okay? So we'll do that from now. Right now it's 11:46. Let's do that from now until 11:56, and then we'll do a break. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. So then we'll do a break till maybe 10 past the hour?
For 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Great. Yeah, I think that works out. Great. Okay, so again, just to repeat one more time what the task is now. From 11:46 till 11:55, okay? Sorry, till 12? Fine, so we'll make it simple. From now until 12, first of all, think, right? Before you start typing. Sometimes people go straight to typing. Take 30 seconds, take a minute to think. By the way, if you want to work with the person next to you, that's also fine. I encourage you to work in groups, especially if you're colleagues from the workplace anyway, and you have maybe similar tasks or similar challenges. Okay? Think about, something that's a bottleneck, something that's a challenge, something that you don't love doing, right? At work, but it's part of your job. And you think to yourself, you know what? Maybe based on what I know about AI, what we've learned this morning, maybe it could do a pretty good job. Okay? Plan out, write out a prompt. You can put it into GPT, put it into Claude, whatever large language model you're comfortable with, you're familiar with. Think about what background information, right? Pretend like it's a person. Pretend like it's a research assistant. What information would I need to give them? What data, what files, what content? Okay? Give it to GPT and see if you can see what you think of the quality of the answer. Okay? We'll do that from now until 12 to 12:15 break. Sure. And if anyone has any questions, what I'll do is just raise your hand. If it's on the chat, I'll try and respond in the chat. If you have a question here, raise your hand and I'll come over and I'll answer your questions. Is it a question for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, you were talking about the how to review your article or something.
Yeah.
Thanks. So you were speaking that one of the way we can use AI is like writing the discussions afterwards, after we have our results, or having it review our work. So how safe is it is to give AI our actual work and our actual results so that it can afterwards give the discussions or conclude?
Yeah, so this is a very important question, and we are going to do an entire session on privacy, so I ask for your patience. In the meantime, what I would say for now is, until we go through that session, I wouldn't give it very private data for now. Okay, I'll show you how to increase your privacy so that there's less of an issue. For now, maybe just start with like more, either anonymized data sets so that, no one knows what it is except for you, or if you don't want to use data sets, just, giving it a task maybe from your daily job that isn't purely scientific. But we'll do a whole session dedicated to privacy. Okay? So first of all, I hope that your experimentation just now with GPT was somewhat improved from what you usually do in knowing how to really use it for its best capabilities and not use it for the things it's not good at. And what I'd like to do now, just to finish off this topic of the frontier models and the GPT, is to just look at what I think are some pretty amazing examples of how we can use GPT, in a very positive way. And the first example that I want to show you today is an example of a paper that was written back in 2023 by two researchers at the Technion Institute in Israel. And they asked themselves the following question. They said, would it be possible for us to automate the writing of an academic paper from start to finish using a combination of different large language models? Okay, so this was a very ambitious project where they tried to push the limits, I would say, of AI and see what it could do for them. So they set up the following experiment. They basically said, we're going to take a data set from the CDC of health-related data, and we want to explore whether eating fruits and vegetables and exercise has a positive impact or lowers the risk of diabetes. Now, as healthcare professionals, you probably know the answer to this question. You maybe do not need this study in order to answer it, right? Obviously, eating healthy and exercise helps to reduce the risk of diabetes. But that being said, what's interesting is the way that they went about it. So what they did was they basically set up an automated process. It took them a year to go ahead and do this. So the title of this article is a bit misleading because the title says ChatGPT can write a paper in an hour, and that is what it did, but actually it took them a year to set up this process, where they would get the tools to analyze the data, to check that analysis, to find patterns and correlations within the data, to then go ahead and start documenting or writing out the different sections of the article, first by outlining the different sections, and then writing the different sections of the article, and then finally acting as a reviewer and a reviser and actually revising the article. And what's incredible about this result is that it's not just, right, when we hear about, well, AI wrote an article, we usually think, well, this is nonsense, right? It's made up. But actually what they were able to do is develop an entirely automated process for a real article that was peer-reviewed, and that's real science. Again, the findings aren't groundbreaking in the sense that I think it's something we all knew, but the process of going about this is quite incredible. So, I think it gives us a little bit of a glimpse. I'm not saying that now all of a sudden all articles are going to be written this way. It obviously depends on what kind of study you're doing. This was a pretty simple, kind of data analysis. And they weren't the ones that were collecting the data in the first place. So obviously it's not replacing the labs that we're working in, but it does beg the question, which parts of the research and research writing process can be automated, right? Which parts can be improved, or at least can we get drafts of, in an impressive way. And they actually have made their tool open source. So if you have data sets that you're experimenting with, the project is called Data to Paper. You can go ahead and actually play around and experiment with that. So that's one example. The second example, I don't know if we're going to be able to hear it here or not. Let's have a look. One sec.
OpenAI.
Okay, great. So you should be able to hear the volume here. This is another example from a different kind of use case that, in my mind, is really quite impressive. And every time I watch it, makes me optimistic about the future of AI. And this is a very different example. This is a father learning with his son. For those who are familiar, it's Sal Khan from the Khan Academy, who is learning with his son. His son is struggling with a math problem, and they are working together with AI in order to help them to solve the math problem. Well, let's see how it does. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a just quick question.
Please.
Is it any tool can identify that this paper was written by AI?
So I mentioned that before. The AI detection tools, okay, in all of the studies that I've seen, and I keep an eye out for these studies, none of them pass 90% accuracy. Okay, I can explain technically why that is. People like to think about AI detection like they think about plagiarism, right? You scan the paper, right? It shows up as plagiarized, but actually what's happening behind the scenes is very, very different. They're two totally different things. And why is that? Plagiarism is, I take this one document with this text, I then compare it to the corpus of all the other documents that exist online, and I say, are there any matches, one-to-one?
Yeah, there is a tool for that, and we do that.
Plenty of tools for that. I'm sure you do that. Every university does that. Right. Now, AI is very different. AI, there is no match. We know that ahead of time, right? It is creating it's generative AI. It is creating a new text. So the technology that's used for plagiarism does not work for generative AI. It would never show up. So what do? They've come up with alternatives. They've said, okay, we know AI, I think this was mentioned before, we know AI uses this word a lot. So we're going to try and detect that. Or we know, for example, you may notice this, sometimes AI has a tendency to write sentences that are very average. So what I mean by that is, as humans, we write sometimes short sentences, sometimes long sentences, sometimes short paragraphs, sometimes long paragraphs. AI tends to be a lot more formulaic. Okay, so it tends to be a lot more like, what would you say? Accurate? Yeah. Well, in terms of the language, maybe, but it's more template. It's like paragraph is 5 sentences, another paragraph of 5 sentences. Each sentence has around 15 words. It's a lot less. It's a lot more standardized. Correct. Thank you. So what those tools do is they'll run a review of the document and they'll say, how standardized is this? How many words is it using that we know AI uses? Now, what's important to understand there is that that's not a proof. That's very different than plagiarism. That's just, we think there's a chance, right, that this was written with AI. Now, the question is, how accurate is it? So in all the studies that they've done, the highest that I've ever seen is 90%, meaning 90% accuracy detection, which means that 1 out of every 10 students or 1 out of every 10 papers that we write, they'll accuse us and either we'll get a false positive or a false negative, right? That's not a great percentage, okay? We don't want to be creating rules around and starting to fail students. I've had calls, by the way, I've gotten calls like these before from students who have said, I didn't use AI, my professors are accusing me of using AI, what do I do? Okay, it's really a big problem. So more than that, I would tell you that even if you can detect AI, it is as simple as once you have the AI output, You can then put it into a paraphrasing tool. There are all sorts of different paraphrasing tools, which just re-say the words in different words, and then the AI does a terrible job at detecting. So it's very easy to circumvent it. It's very easy to get around it. So my recommendation, whenever universities or publishers come to me and ask me, Avi, how should we be doing this? I say, if you're a professor and you think your student has written AI, give them a bad grade because the writing isn't creative, or they're not saying anything new, or judge the content, okay? Don't try to start playing police officer about whether or not this is AI written or not, because I don't think anyone wants to be in a situation where we're making accusations and then they're denying it, and it just becomes a mess. I will say I did see one interesting case where a grant proposal was submitted, and I guess the proposal was so bad that the committee turned around and was like, this is very clearly AI, and if you do this again, your university is going to lose funding. Now, again, that's not because they used AI, it's because they used AI so poorly and the science was so poor that it was just super obvious, right? So I think we need to make a distinction here between responsible use of AI, like we saw before. I'm having trouble starting this paragraph. I use it to write me a sentence. I then revise. I review. I edit. I put in my citations. I put it right. That's very different use than just like, hey, write me a paper, copy, paste, send it up. Okay, but again, as far as I'm aware, and I try to read all the research on this because it's really interesting to me, there are no tools that can do the same degree of accuracy that the plagiarism tools can do. Okay. So now again, this is a video of Sal Khan. Sal Khan is from the Khan Academy, for those who are familiar, studying with his son, and his son has a trouble with a particular math problem. And let's see how AI helps the child in what I think is a very educational way, okay, to answer his problem. And what I want you to kind of, think about here is not just in the case of, childhood education, but in your roles, what educational aspects are there? When do you teach? When are you taught? And could AI be an interesting, use as well? Sorry.
Invited myself and my son Imran here to try out some of their new technology. So we're curious about how good it might be at tutoring someone in math on Khan Academy. So let's get it started. It's loading up. All right, make sure you can see our screen.
Actually, in this format.
Hello there. I'm here with my son, and I'd love you to tutor him on this math problem. But don't give him the answer. You can ask questions and nudge him in the right direction, but I really want to make sure he understands it himself. And he's here in the room, so you can talk to him directly.
Of course, I'd be happy to help. Let's look at the problem together. Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect. That's correct. Now, looking at the triangle, which side do you think is the hypotenuse?
Really, I'm not totally sure. I think it might be this one, but I really am not sure. This side AC?
You're close. Actually, side AC is called the adjacent side to the angle alpha. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle and is directly opposite the right angle. Can you find which one is the hypotenuse?
Oh, okay, I see. So, I think the hypotenuse is this really long side from A to B. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Well done. Now that you've identified the hypotenuse, can you identify which side is the opposite side to angle alpha?
Okay, well, you told me earlier that this was the adjacent side, and I know that's the hypotenuse, so I'm guessing that this side, BC, is the opposite side.
Great deduction. That's absolutely correct. Now that you've identified all the sides relative to angle alpha, do you remember the formula for finding the sine of an angle in a right triangle?
Yeah, I know that the sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse.
Perfect. That's absolutely right. Now, can you apply that formula to find sine alpha in a triangle using the lengths of the sides that we've identified?
Okay, so I mean, you told me that 7, this side BC, is the opposite side. And then you said that the hypotenuse is the longest side, so that would be this side 8b, which is 25. So would the answer be 7 over 25?
Excellent work. That's correct. Sine alpha equals 7 over 25. You did a great job identifying the sides and using the sine formula. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask.
Great. So, it's really quite amazing, when you understand and think about how we can use AI in educational ways, right? I think that a lot of people think about AI as a shortcut or a cheating, mechanism, but actually, when we open up our minds to what's possible, you can see that this can really transform the way that we do education within our institutions, with our children, right? And what amazes me is also kind of the pedagogical benefits that there are in this approach, right? The student can do this anytime, day or night, whenever they feel like it. They can go back if they're struggling with something. The AI detects what their issue is. It's one-on-one. It can do it in their local language. It doesn't have to be in English. What else? It works at their pace. If they need them to slow down, if they need them to give another problem to solve, it has the ability to do that. And this is not, by the way, some distant dream. You can do this today with GPT Pro, only for the $20 version. So not everybody can do this, but anyone with GPT Pro can go onto their phone, can go onto their tablet, and do this today. This is a technology that's currently in use. So it's not some pipe dream. And I think this is just the beginning when we think about, what AI is and how we can use it. And again, expand our minds beyond just I can get an automated, answer to my question. Think about it in different ways and in different contexts. And it's not something, when we talk about AI, it's really transformative in the sense that not only does it make us a little bit better at what we do, a little bit faster at what we do, it actually, in my mind, will change the way we go about very basic parts of our lives. Okay, so, again, moving right ahead, the way I like to think about Gen AI is like a mirror, right? Essentially, when we're asking a question, or when we're getting recommendations, what we're getting back is a reflection of all the content that's online, processed, right? Put into a big salad and spit back out at us. So if there are things that we're not happy with, if there are issues that come up, sometimes instead of getting angry at the tool, which is kind of the natural, they're like, why did it say that? Or how could it be that racist? Or what's the issue here? Think to ourselves, in what way is this reflecting the entirety of human content, right? That's essentially what it's doing. It's spitting back to us what the average human content might be. Okay. I want everyone to put up a big dividing barrier in your mind. Let's just first summarize what we've learned so far this morning. We said we were going to look at 2 approaches to generative AI. Until now, we've been looking at the first approach, which is what I call the frontier model approach, or the large language model approach, where it is generative. It means that it is all this content that's been scooped up, right, that's been vacuumed up online, processed through the algorithm, and it is giving me a series of words, right, that it has learned from its memory that in some way answers my question. Is that series of words accurate? Is it right? Maybe yes, maybe not, okay? Now, one more thing about ChatGPT is that there's no way for it to reference. We always ask, why can't it give me references? Why can't it give me citations for what it says? Why does it just give me answers? How do I know if those answers are right? The answer is because it is giving me an average, a mean of all the different content that's online. So it can't track it back to one answer. It's a combination of millions of different pages of content combined into this one answer that you're getting. So then the question that scientists then ask themselves is, okay, but what if I just want to get a scientific answer to a question? I'm a doctor, I'm at the bedside of a patient, they've got these funky symptoms, I don't know what the diagnosis is. Can I use it? And the answer with GPT is no. That's a very bad use case, right? Because we don't know where the answer is coming from. We don't know what the issue really is, okay? There are cases, by the way, where when GPT has very kind of robust medical files, it actually can do a pretty good job of diagnosis. But in general, if I want a rapid question to a rapid answer, it's not a good use case. So what do we do if we actually want real answers to real questions? And the answer to that question is the second approach that I want to teach you about this morning to generative AI, and that's the RAG approach. Out of curiosity, anyone here familiar with the RAG approach? By raise of hand. No, okay, so we're going to learn the RAG approach. In my mind, the RAG approach for your work will be maybe as important, if not more important, than the generative approach. Much less well known, but this is what you want to be doing. The RAG is an acronym, it's short for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and I'll explain what that means. So the way I like to think about this is, imagine you're taking your dog out for a walk. And you take it to the park where all the other dogs are and all the other dog walkers are. And spread out across the entire park are all the possible bones that dogs like. There's different colors, different tastes, different nutrition components, and there are just thousands of bones spread across the park. And you want a bone that's perfect for, right, your dog buddy. And you say, okay, buddy, go out. I want you to find the bone that's exactly the calorie intake that you need for today. That's going to be healthy, but not make you too full for your next meal. Okay, and that's best for your kind of breed. All right, you send the dog out. The dog goes ahead, sniffs all the different bones in the park, finds the one that's perfect for it, brings it back, and then puts it by your side. You check it, you say, you know what? He's right. Out of those thousands of bones, you picked the exact right one for him. That's how RAG systems work. So now let's bring it back to science. The way that it works is that when I send a question, when I ask a question, similar to the way that I would chat with GPT, it sends out a request online and searches all the different sources that are available online, okay, or it can search a specific segment or subsection of those sources. And instead of making a big salad of all the, right, mixing everything up together, it says, of all the websites online or all the content sources that I have, these 5 seem to do the best job answering your question. Or these 10 seem to do the best job answering your question. Okay? Then what it does, once it's identified those 10 articles or those 10 pieces of content, it then does the generative part of the RAG, where it then says, okay, how do I get an answer to my question based on these 10 sources? So similar, by the way, to what we saw before with GPT when I upload my own sources. But here I don't need to know I don't need to have the data set. I don't need to have the sources. I just need to ask the question. It will go online, do the search for me, find the most relevant sources, and then bring me back an answer, which has 2 benefits. First of all, the answer is based on the sources, and I see which sources they are. Okay, and it cites, within the answer, it cites exactly what the source of the answer is. So it's more accurate, okay, and it's more transparent. And I think for scientists, this is a real game changer. So we're gonna experiment with that kind of tool. So what we're gonna look at today is a tool called Perplexity. Okay, you may have heard of Perplexity, you may have played around with it. We're gonna look at a tool called Perplexity, and let me explain to you before I show you a demo of how Perplexity works, let me explain to you what the are the founders trying to accomplish. Perplexity is a challenge to Google, okay? So in order to understand Perplexity, let's first understand or remind ourselves how Google works, okay? Because we all use Google, we all use it every day, all the time, for all sorts of tasks. When you search for something in Google, how do they rank the answers, right? Meaning what comes up, how do they decide what's on page 1, what's on page 2, what's on page 3? What influences that? Anyone have any idea? Sorry? Most popular. Okay, very good. Okay, so it could be sponsored, it could be someone paid money. Okay, if someone paid money, that definitely doesn't give us any trust in that source, just means someone paid money for it. If it's most popular, okay, popularity is interesting, but is popularity good? Most seen by other people. But then how do they decide? Let's assume we had a new keyword that was never existed before, right? How do they decide which one appears on, let's say I use the keyword, I don't know, colon cancer. How do they decide which of the, right, there's millions of pages on colon cancer around the internet. How do they decide what's on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 100? The answer is there's this whole game called SEO, search engine optimization, where we try to make the page popular. You use the word popular, I think that's a good word. It's essentially, sorry? Well, it's starting to use AI, but let's for the purposes of this conversation, let's talk about without AI. The traditional way that Google works is it is saying what are the most popular pages that answer your question or that address your keywords that you did. So it may, and by the way, that means that all websites are built, or people who build websites intentionally, they build them for a few things. They build them to suck people in, right? Like, ooh, it's clickbait. What's clickbait? That's a way to get you to click on that site. Why do they care about that? Because the more you get a click, the more Google's going to think you're important. Okay, or the more time they'll suck you in to spend more time on a website. Because Google looks, did a person spend 5 seconds on the website, 10 seconds, or 10 minutes? If it's 10 minutes, it's a sign to them that this is a good website. Now, that's fine, and Google can do it the way they want. But a popularity contest isn't necessarily a scientific accuracy gauge, okay? So what I mean by that is just because something gets a lot of hits or people spend a lot of time on it doesn't mean it's scientifically accurate information. So for example, there was a really interesting study done by a professor, also at the Technion, who showed that in Arabic, for example, already on the first page, there are when you search for issues relating to women's health, you actually already get not scientifically accurate information on page 1. Okay? And different languages, it works differently. It depends on which content is popular, which content is clicked on more, etc. Now, in English, we're kind of used to, okay, most of the content in the first few pages is generally accurate. I don't know about Georgian. It's an interesting question. It might be an interesting study to do, right? Put in some, sorry? For sure. We'll talk about Google Scholar and we'll talk about alternatives to Google Scholar that are AI in a minute. But yes, Google Scholar works a little bit differently. I don't know if it's entirely there. The influence is by citations, right? It's not just clicks. It's also more scientific information. But I'm just talking about regular Google for now. So Perplexity came along and said, okay, that's fine, Google. You're running a popularity contest, right? You're seeing which pages are clicked the most, stayed on the most. What if but wouldn't it be helpful if we had a search engine which gave you the most accurate answers first, or the most trustworthy, reliable answers first? Okay, what if we gave that priority instead of giving popularity priority? So they did the same thing as Google. They indexed the entire internet, understood what each page is. They send their web crawlers around all the different websites. But then they said, which websites can we trust more? Which websites can we trust less? And that's also an interesting question. How do you gauge trust, right? So I think we all know that, let's say, I don't know, if we get something from, an academic journal or from the Mayo Clinic, we're going to trust it more than some person's personal blog. But that's not so obvious, right? Maybe that's not correct. Anyway, Perplexity, essentially, it indexes the internet. You could search it searches the internet and it gives you an answer to your question based on what it determines to be the most accurate answers. Now, I want to think about what does it mean accurate answers. So if there's a question that I have that's a science question where the answers are in the peer-reviewed published literature, so that it makes sense that, right, it's going to find it from the published peer-reviewed literature, or at least the stuff it has access to. But what if I'm in the middle of the pandemic and I want to know what rates of mortality are, let's say, in a specific area or with a specific group of people? Let's say mortality rates among children in the last month. If it did a search in the academic literature, that's not going to help me. Okay, that's only going to come out a few months later. So maybe it needs to search where, not so much in the academic literature, but maybe it needs to search in government records, publicly available records. So there's a certain intelligence about, what I'm trying to say is half the work that Perplexity needs to do is not giving me the answer, it's finding where is the information or data that it needs in order to give me an answer. Or I'll give you a different example. You're planning your skiing trip. I know people love to come to Georgia for skiing, but you say, you know what, I want to get out of the country, I want to go somewhere else. And you ask yourself, where has had the most snowfall this winter? Again, you look in the peer-reviewed literature, it's not going to help you very much, right? You're not going to get a very good vacation. You want to look at maybe the different websites, the meteorological websites, right? With weather, history of weather, right? Pattern. So that's the genius of Perplexity, is to be able to identify which tool, which place you want to go to for which action. Okay, so now I want to show you actually how to use Perplexity. And in my mind, this is one of those tools that's really a game changer when it comes to AI. So the first thing, so you see here, there's a, just an empty, question box where I can ask whatever I want. So I'm going to ask, I'm running a project currently where, or I'm helping to start up a project where I live, where we're trying to see whether mountain biking can be a helpful therapeutic activity for people with PTSD. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, and that's my theory, that's my hypothesis, right? Is that mountain biking can be very helpful. I'm a big mountain biker myself, so I'm biased, but right, I want to see if there are what does the medical research say about the effects and impacts of mountain biking on individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, I'm going to ask Perplexity. So let's see how this goes. Now, before I send it off on its search, and again, it's going to go look through the entire internet and figure out what sources are available to it that are going to do the best job at answering this question. Now, before I send it off, I want to show you a few really important features here, okay? I'm going to change it from the auto. Auto means that it chooses how it's going to search. I want it to do what's called deep research. You may have heard about this. Deep research has only come out in the last few weeks. ChatGPT came out with the deep research. Perplexity came out with the deep research. I prefer Perplexities for different reasons. Okay, but you can also do it on ChatGPT if you have the paid version. And now the reason that I'm asking it to do deep research is because I don't want it to just come back to me right away with an answer. When it comes back to me right away, it doesn't do a full search of everything online. It just finds kind of the top answer and just gives it to me. I want it to do a proper search, take its time. You'll see here it takes a few minutes. Okay, but actually, instead of seeing that as a bad sign, in my mind, you see that as a good sign. Because there's a lot of processes that are happening, and I'll explain exactly what's happening behind the scenes as this is happening. So the first thing I do is I change it from auto to deep search. And again, if you want a quick answer to a question, don't do deep search. But if you're asking a scientific question, you want it to be thorough, do deep search. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is if you look over here to the right, you'll see here currently the default is that it's searching the web. Okay, it's searching online, anything online. Okay, I prefer not because I don't want it to come up with, again, those random bloggers or people I don't know or, content sources I don't trust. So what I do is I turn off web and I'm going to turn on academic. And now what I'm essentially doing is I'm saying search only academic and scholarly papers. I want your answer to be only from the academic literature. And now I'm going to send it off on its way. Okay, so the two changes I made were, again, number one is I changed it from auto to deep research. Okay, don't worry, I'll give you time to practice this, so you don't need to be doing it. First, what I would suggest is first watch how I do it. I'll explain to you how it works, and then I'll give you time to experiment yourselves. Okay, and I'm going to send it off to go ahead and do its search. Okay, so now let me explain to you what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, it's going to be doing a lot of talking to itself, and I want to explain to you why it needs to talk to itself. So essentially what's happening is, it is doing, there are two kind of new parts to AI, which I think are very powerful, specifically for researchers. Number one is reasoning, okay? And number two is agents. Okay, so let me explain what that means. Reasoning is kind of what we're used to about when we would go through a research question. If I were to try to pick apart this research question, right? How does mountain biking impact individuals with PTSD? So let's pick that apart, right, as scientists, as researchers. So we would want to understand, first of all, what research is there on mountain biking in general, right? Well-being, mountain biking, and psychological benefits. Maybe I would want to look at some of the physiological elements, right? What happens when my heart rate goes up, right? Adrenaline, endorphins, what happens, right, when we do physical activity. That might be one component of the question. I might want to look at PTSD, right? What are the main causes of PTSD? How does that work? What are some of the challenges of PTSD? How might mountain biking, right, impact being outdoors, being out in nature, right, running, having that adrenaline rush? How might that affect PTSD? How might it look compared to other kinds of sports? Okay, these are kind of this is reasoning. This is just what, if we were sitting around a table in a lab or, in my department, we would say, how would we answer this question? In order to answer this question, we would need to break it apart into its basic components in order to understand it. It's doing that for me. Now, it may be doing it, I'm not looking, I don't know, right? It may be doing it the way I want it to do it. It may not be doing it the way I want it to do it. We'll look at it in a minute. Okay, so that's the reasoning part of it. The agents, this is something you don't even see, this is happening in the background, is basically, it's talking to each other. Okay, so what do I mean by that? It does a first search and it says, okay, I found some interesting articles about mountain biking and PTSD. Okay, now let's look at those articles and see what concepts are there that are kind of shared to those articles. Maybe words I didn't use in my query. So I didn't use the word adrenaline in my query, but maybe it detected within the research literature, the first search that it did, well, adrenaline's a very important component to understanding, right, this question. So now I'm going to run a new search. I didn't ask it to do this, right? It's doing it on its own. I'm going to run a new search on how does adrenaline, right? What are the benefits or negatives of adrenaline on individuals with PTSD? Okay. And so that's what's called the agents. They're talking back and forth with each other in order to refine the research question, in order to come up with even a better answer. Okay, and that's why I say, by the way, I trust more the tools that take their time than I do the ones that give me the original answer, because that reasoning process takes time. Okay, so let's have a look. I think it's ready. Is it ready now? Nope, still working, but it's working through. So, oh yeah, here we go. Okay. Okay, so let's get to, we want to go back up here. Great. Okay, so let's look at, the first thing I like to do is I like to look at its reasoning. It shares the reasoning with me, and I like to look at the reasoning because I want to understand myself. Do I agree with this reasoning? Does it make sense to me or does it not make sense to me? So the first thing it says here is, it found several articles discussing the impact of mountain biking on mental health, particularly for individuals suffering from PTSD. The articles highlight benefits such as improved mood, reduced anxiety, and increased social interaction. Okay, but I still need to explore any potential limitations or risks associated with this activity. Okay, so basically it's telling me I found some benefits. There's some interesting articles, right, document some of the benefits of this, but I still am not going to say that, yes, we should recommend this because, right, there may be big downsides that I'm not taking into consideration. It also tells me, by the way, how it went about, which keywords it used, which keyword phrases it used in order to do this initial search, the first search that it did. So mountain biking PTSD, mountain biking mental health, that's how it searched the literature. Okay, now let's take a look at, Okay, now it's abstracting it out a little bit. It's saying, okay, I found a few articles discussing the benefits of physical exercise. Okay, maybe not necessarily mountain biking, but exercise in general. I want to understand that literature. It then found potential, then it went through and started looking for potential risks. Okay, so there could be negative impacts such as hyperarousal or anxiety. So it could actually, so what we're learning from, so it's understanding that could actually be a trigger, right? So we need to be careful if we're going to put together such a program, because we need to make sure that, right, that we're guiding it in a way where we're not triggering people in a way that's unhealthy. Let's see here. Okay. All right, I'm not going to go through the entire reasoning process here, because you see it's like 15, 20 steps. But what's really interesting to kind of get into the head of the computer to understand how it goes about attacking this question and how it goes about answering this question. Okay, and now, by the way, it gets more specific as we go along. So here we go. It says, here, this study, it's starting to get into specific studies. This study collected data, cardiac data from 99 veterans diagnosed with PTSD during Project Hero riding challenges. So it's starting to get a little bit more into the specifics of the studies that it found. Okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm disappointed here because in general, it will give me dozens of sources. I don't know why it only gave me 2 sources here. That's something I have to check. Okay, it should give me dozens and dozens of sources that it found. It's possible, I don't know this for sure, it's possible that it says, these are the 2 articles that are kind of like the seminal articles in the field, and that's why I chose it, but I'm still not thrilled with it. We can try running a different question and see if we get better results, but let's just see what it got me, okay? So essentially, what I can do now is I can say, it's great that it went through all this reasoning, but what are the outputs? What are the articles that it found? So let's take a look at the articles that it found. Okay, so this article is an article that from Proceedings of the International Symposium of Human Factors and Ergonomics in Healthcare. I'd have to check if that's a source that I trust. It's an article I see here from Sage. I could go ahead and view it on Sage, on the Sage website. Okay, and the article here is about investigating heart rate patterns during hyperarousal events among veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so again, this could be very relevant to the question that I asked. Let's take a look at the other article that it gave me. This is from PubMed this time. Adherence to and persistence with statin therapy in a veteran population. No, this is less relevant. Okay, so I'm not happy with its output. We're going to try it again. We're going to run it again, see if we can get better results. But essentially what happens here is it's showing me I have chosen of the entire literature, I've chosen these articles, okay, do the best job at answering your question, okay, in one way or another. Now, once it actually gets into the answer, what's really interesting and valuable here is that you can see, so it's giving me an answer, and we're familiar with this answer based on, what we know from GPT. Okay, it gives me an answer, but again, the question always is, can I trust the answer? So what we see here is, in addition to just giving me the answer, okay, and breaking down my question into, subcategories, it actually gives me the citation for where it is getting that answer from. So instead of me having to trust the tool blindly and just say, well, I don't know if it's telling me the truth or not, it gives me an answer, it gives me the citation that goes with that answer, and then I can go and check, and I can click through and I can see if it's something that I want to read further or not. Okay? Now I see here, by the way, that broke down my topic into the nature and prevalence of PTSD, recreational therapy as an intervention for PTSD, mountain biking's therapeutic mechanisms for PTSD. So it's actually breaking down this in theory, if it when it works the way it's supposed to, resembles an introduction, right? Resembles a literature, the beginnings of a literature review, or at least a summary of the main literature in a field. So if I want to understand, the latest drug treatments in a specific area, I can ask that question, okay, and I can get a sourced answer. Let's just scroll all the way down here first. Okay, let's do something else. Let's do something a little bit more general. Okay, and let's see how. Let's try it again. Okay, so here I'm going to ask, what are the latest drug treatment options for colon cancer? Okay, again, I'm doing deep research. Again, I can choose whether I want just academic sources or sources from around the web. Okay, this time I'm going to include sources from around the web as well. Okay, because maybe there's some, relevant articles. Again, everything's transparent. I can see exactly where the information is coming from. So let's see what results I get here. Okay, and by the way, one of the things that I think is really important to notice when it comes to these tools is when you think about how you use Google Scholar, okay? We'll talk about that for a bit, but when you think about how you use Google Scholar, you have to think about all the different keyword combinations, right? In order to, and do different Boolean searches in order to really understand kind of what is the latest research on this topic, what does it say? And what this is doing is it's automating all of that. I don't necessarily need to think of all the exact search terms because it's doing that thinking for me. It knows that when I'm searching for latest drug treatments, it's going to need to do something like, here, let's see, latest drug treatments, colon cancer, new drug therapies, immunotherapy. I didn't mention immunotherapy in my question. So how did it know to do that, right? It knew to do that based on its reasoning, based on its logic. So it's very hard for us to actually be comprehensive. I think the end goal here is whenever we're doing a search, we want to get to a comprehensive answer. We want to get to an answer which covers all of the literature. Now, it's not there yet. Okay, it's an AI tool. It's not there yet. But that's the goal, is to think about all the potential manipulations. And we can do that, okay, we can think about which keywords are relevant. But it can do it at a much higher level because it can compare it to all the similar articles and say, well, you didn't mention this keyword, but we see that that's very important for the subject area. So it actually, it improves on what I would say is the human approach to it. Now, here we go. Okay, now you see here, this answer gave me 45 sources. So we'll scroll through and take a look at those answers, the sources in a few minutes. Here we go, and we're getting an answer, which is fantastic. I will say one point before we start looking at the sources for this answer. Okay, I will say one point to note, and that is, unfortunately, this tool and most 95% of other tools on the market don't have full text access to all of the literature, which is a big downside. It is not necessarily Perplexity's fault. This is the publishers do not want to give access. They lock it the same way they lock it behind a paywall for us. They lock it behind a paywall for these search engines because they're afraid of their business all of a sudden going to Perplexity instead of, right? People won't go to what's the point of going to a journal website if you can just get the information from Perplexity or from any other tool? So it's complicated. Yeah. No, unfortunately, I think they can't access the pirate sources, although maybe some of them do, I don't think they can go into Sci-Hub and scrape from there. So what they do have, which is important, is they have the metadata from those other sources. So they have the abstract, they have the title, they have some keywords, so they've got something. It's not like they have nothing, but as everybody here knows, right, you can't compare full text article to just the abstract. So we need to understand that is a downside, okay? And especially if in your field there's a lot of research behind a paywall, then it's harder to do it that way. Again, what we can do if we have the articles that we know we want, we need, we can go ahead and do a similar process by uploading it ourselves, right? But again, the classic use case for Perplexity here is where we're looking for literature or an answer to a question that we might not have. So let's take a look at what we got here. Okay, so the first article here is from PubMed, okay, from BMC Cancer. Okay, I don't know if we have any immunologists here, but if we do, you're welcome to chime in on whether you think this is a relevant, how relevant this article is to our question. Already in the second source, we see is not an academic source or not a purely academic article, so let's take a look at that. Ooh, and it doesn't want to let me take a look at that, but it's from a site called eCancer, which again, I'd have to check and see, and see what my trust level of this is. The third source is from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. So again, a reliable source, but this isn't an academic article per se. It's more of a kind of a just general information article. You've got some sources here from the FDA, back to PubMed for some more academic articles. But again, this is because we decided to do it this way, right? We decided to search for a combination of web sources and academic articles. Now, let's say I'm going through and I say, you know what? I don't know what this website is, this eCancer, and I'm scrolling through and I don't really want this, this target, I don't know what this is either. So I don't want those. What I can do is I can actually go ahead and remove these two sources. Okay? And then what it's meant to do is rerun the search. Okay. No, maybe. Oh, okay. So I needed to do this. So I'm going to take these two sources. I'm going to remove these two, and now it reruns the search with only the sources that I chose. Okay. So out of those 45, I'm now rerunning that search with 43 of those sources. So I don't have full control because I can't tell it exactly which sources to choose, but once it gives me a list of sources, I can say, you know what, get rid of those and keep these. Okay, so that is that can be very helpful. Now let's go back here. Okay. Now what you see here is, okay, so here it's a lot better populated. You see here, so for example, in the first part of the answer is about recent FDA approvals for colorectal cancer. And you see here, I've got an article here. So this is actually an article from the FDA from 2025. This is really recent, right? And by the way, it makes sense because I asked it for the most recent, right, drugs. So it's actually, I'm actually happy in this case that it brings me sources from the FDA, right? That's actually what I would want. So that's all from the FDA source. I see the next section is about a novel anti-angiogenic approach. This is from this other news website, which again, I'd have to see. And as I scroll through, there's a lot here, right? As I scroll through, you see here that each part of the answer has its associated citation, right? So that I can check exactly where this is coming from. I can also, by the way, go down here and it gives me some related questions. So, basically suggested follow-up questions that I might want to ask following my initial question. Okay, so it's really quite an impressive and powerful tool in the sense that it can search the entire internet, find the sources that's most relevant, integrate those sources and synthesize them with each other, give me an answer, okay, and based on existing sources. Now, would I say that if you were to ask me, is the quality of this, would it be the same as if you would have 2 months dedicated to just doing literature review and writing up the summary? I'm sure you'd do a better job. I'm sure you would, okay? Usually when I speak to groups, they say it's about the level of a graduate student, okay? So we need to understand, it's not perfect. Part of that is because it doesn't have access to all the sources, but part of it is just because the reasoning that it does, right, that again is transparent, we can go and see that reasoning, is probably not exactly the reasoning that we would do, and that's okay. What I think the goal here is not to do a full literature search and find everything. I think the goal here is when we're searching for a new topic, we want overall general accuracy, okay? But we also want transparency and be able to see where things come from. We have the ability to do that in a short amount of time, right? And this is the kind of, again, if a human were to do this process, months, right? If not more. So right, it's understanding the benefits and the downsides. There's a few other things you can do here in Perplexity. You can search for, if let's say you need to teach it, it'll find you videos that are going to be accurate, that are going to be related. Again, depending on how much there is available online. I don't know why it's telling me no videos found now. And it can also find images that are going to be relevant. So it might be worth looking through some of those videos, especially if we want to use it in an educational context as well. Okay, so, all right, before I send you off to go ahead and experiment with Perplexity, does anyone have any questions about how to use it, how it works? Do you want me to go over something again?
You should register it in this webpage, right?
Yes, so for most of the tools that I'm going to show you, you at least need to create a profile. So most of the tools that I will show you are what are called freemium model. So so that's what I'm talking about. So freemium model is as follows. Most software nowadays is like this, where you get a certain amount for free, okay, and then the rest you get, and then at a certain point they'll say, yeah, that's fine. If everyone can hear me, it's okay. And then at a certain point they'll say, you have to start paying for it, right? Once you become like a super user, once you use it, 20 times a day, they'll be like, okay, too much.
Please use the microphone.
I think the battery is that. Oh, is there another one? This one? Okay. So I should sit next time. Thanks. Sorry about that. Yes. So Perplexity is like that in the sense that, thank you, in the sense that you can use, you can use it for free, but it is limited, meaning at a certain point it'll say, okay, you've used too much. Usually it resets every day, so it's not a big deal. Right? As long as you aren't using it for 6 hours a day, you probably have noticed that with ChatGPT as well. You have a certain amount for free, and then at a certain point it'll say, sorry, stop, you used too much, now you need to start paying us. There was a question on the chat, which I'll share with everybody earlier today, about how to go about this decision about which tools to use and which tools should I pay for or should I not pay for. My suggestion is always experiment first with the free versions. There's no reason to jump to buy tools. Different tools are going to be good for different people. I can't come and say everyone should buy this tool. I also wouldn't want to do that. If you find yourself using Perplexity, if you find that it's helpful, that something that would have taken you 2 months is now taking you 2 days, right? And you want to use it more, then yeah, it might be worth paying the $20 a month, right, for advanced use. But most of them just are going to require for you to log in, and then you have a certain amount to be able to use for free. So I'd say push as much as you can for the free version, right? Try and use as much as you can of the free version. And then if you find that it's really helpful, first of all, maybe consider getting it yourself, or maybe consider talking to your, where you work, to your employer, and asking them, is this a tool that we can onboard? Okay? Yeah.
The Perplexity and ChatGPT, what's the difference between that, and any of them is more better to be used to use this kind of articles and usages and so on?
Yeah, so the difference is between the two types of generative AI. If you're looking to do creative work, to do language work, to do thinking, brainstorming, okay, out of the box, ChatGPT is really great. That's what I use ChatGPT for. If you have the information at your fingertips, you have the data set, you have the information, GPT is enough. If you want accurate answers to questions, or you want to find sources, you don't know where they are. You don't know where the answer to this information is. You don't know what the latest colon cancer treatments are. Perplexity is much better. If you start asking GPT, it's going to start lying to you. It's going to start hallucinating, making stuff up. Which is, by the way, it's why I always go back to this saying, it's the hammer and the cake, right? We need the right tool for the right thing. There's not one tool that's going to rule them all. We'll go through a little bit later which tools there are and how you can compare and which one to decide to use. But again, you have all the materials, you have all the sources, GPT is fine. You don't have the materials, you want to do an external literature search, Perplexity is better. Okay? Yes?
So I was just very curious that correctly, like generation of my mom is pediatrician, and her colleague suggested her to use some AI tool. They're both working there as a family doctor. So she was asking, please download this some cool AI tool. I was like, which one is that? And she couldn't recall the exact name. I was just so curious what is like called. Is it specific developed for like a specific field, or what are the like suggestions for the specialists? Because it's making it easier for the clinicians as well to like make, I don't know, quick recommendations or like go through the guidelines. I don't know.
So I'll answer that question in two parts. Number one is your field is complicated in terms of AI. I would say the risk profile is high. Okay, patient data, patient security, health. These are not areas. They're not going to be. There's a lot of experimentation. Sorry, confidentiality. Correct. There's a lot of regulation, ethical issues. There's a lot of barriers to entry. Okay. On the flip side, I know people are already. I don't want to get her in trouble, but I was speaking to my mom, who's an ultrasound technician, and she's like, "Yeah, I use ChatGPT all the time to answer questions." And I'm like, "No, Mom, don't use that. Use this." Right? There's different tools that are helpful in different circumstances, and we know that doctors are already using it. In fact, they did a study recently where AI took the medical exams in the U.S. and outperformed the average student in terms of the answers. Now, does that mean all of a sudden AI should be doing everything? No. Let's not overreact to that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should be handing things over, but as a aid, a bedside aid, could be very powerful. Every use case is different, right? The doctor that's going and doing the rounds in the hospital is very different than the researcher in the lab who's trying to come up with the next cancer research breakthrough. So unfortunately, it's not like there's one tool to rule them all, right? So I can't necessarily answer specifically about that tool. I mean, if she remembers the name of the tool, I'm happy to tell you if I know about it or not. But there's so much out there. So what I think really needs to happen, and maybe this is in your control, maybe not, is as an institution, you need to think about, start with needs. So what I mean by that is start with, what are the big challenges that we have at our institution? What are the things that aren't working the way we want them to work, right? Then number two is understand, before we get into this tool for this use case, understand how the tools work, right? Understand that if we that there's no way to automate a literature review from start to finish perfectly. But maybe there are people that are doing research that Perplexity would help them. So we want to plug that in there. And maybe maybe we're doing presentations, PowerPoint presentations. So there's a different tool that can help them there. In terms of actual, medical tools, there's an interesting WhatsApp group that I'm a part of called AI in Medicine, people experimenting. I would say mostly still in the experimentation stage, okay? Because of all the regulation, because of all the privacy concerns, etc. But that doesn't mean there aren't already tools that can be helpful to us in our work. I can already see the first story of, someone asking GPT for a diagnosis and then, doing certain medical procedure and then that being a mistake. And, so we need to be slow walking it, I would say, when it comes to medical.
The institutions should prepare their chatbots for guiding patients. It's already happened in some institutions. It's a decision. Kids depend on profiles, which kind of profiles they have. And these chatbots, they are very helpful for patients, for guiding how to do next step before they go to the physicians for taking final decision. It's not easy.
It's not easy, but it's really important and can be very transformative. Can be very helpful. Chatbot is one way of delivering the AI, for sure. My guess, I could be wrong, what would be interesting to know about that use case is, what data was it trained on? That's always the first question, in my opinion, to ask whenever a new tool is presented is, what's sitting behind this data, okay? And what did it train on? If the answer is, it's generic ChatGPT, I would distance myself. I would say, I don't want to be trusting Reddit, right? To give me a right to tell patients what to be doing. If they trained it based on, based on, large corpuses of training materials, let's say, that have been developed over many years, and they've, they've tested it, right? And it meets certain benchmarks, whatever those benchmarks are.
In radiology, for example, it's very helpful in imaging how to check, how to get the correct answers.
Yes, I think radiology is going to be the first area that AI is going to be. Again, the ability to find, I don't know how to explain this, but the ability to diagnose images and to, and to find things that we wouldn't necessarily be able to find is yeah, for sure. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to give everybody, it's now 1:20, I want to give everybody till 1:30 to go ahead and, if you haven't yet signed up for Perplexity, you can go ahead and ask your research question. My suggestion, you don't have to do this, is I'd ask two questions. The first question I'd ask is a question you know the answer to. Search your own research question, okay? Why is that? Why is that important? Because it's important for you not to trust me, okay? Or don't trust the tool. Don't trust any tool until you prove to yourself, right, that it works well. So ask a question, your own doctoral research, whatever it may be, or question that you've spent time researching and thinking about, and have a look at the answer. Again, it may not find every article because of what we discussed, right? Those limitations on articles, but you want to get a general idea of, is it covering the right subjects? Is it bringing some of the relevant materials? After you've done that once, assuming that you've been able to do it successfully, then you can move to a new question, a question you don't know the answer to. Again, not trusting it blindly and copying and pasting, but rather asking a question, seeing what sources it provides, seeing what sources it brings. And again, remember, think critically. The question that I want to ask, do I want only academic articles to answer my question? Or do I want only the web? Or do I want a combination of both? Okay, and then go ahead and do that. Good luck.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, and you know, my guess is that, you know, there's probably mixed results in terms of, you know, what you found. You know, some of you may be more happy with the output that you got. Some of you may have more criticism of it, depending on which field it is, how much open access literature there is available. There's still a certain ways to go in order for it to be perfect. But I think we need to think about it for those in the room that are, you know, my age and older, kind of like the first days of the internet, right? If you remember back in the day when the internet was first coming out, you had, you know, the screen would slowly come up on your screen, right? It would take 5 minutes just for the page to load, and you had to call it via your modem, and it just took a lot of time. It wasn't very efficient. And back then you could have also said, well, this isn't so helpful. I'm just gonna forget about it. The internet's not gonna be that important. And I think we need to recognize and understand that the pace of change here is so fast that even if things don't work perfectly, even if not every tool works perfectly today, we still need to be learning them. We still need to be understanding them. We need to be practicing our prompting and practicing reviewing the outputs and thinking critically about the outputs, because it will only get better with time. And in my opinion, it's not that AI is going to necessarily take over and automate, although there may be certain processes that AI can do that for. It more will be professionals who know how to use different AI tools and how to use them properly and responsibly, who will have a significant advantage over their colleagues, right? Who will be ahead of the game, let's say, when it comes to you know, AI. So you know, that's kind of how I look at things. And the way that I see it is not so much that AI needs to be doing everything that you're doing currently, but rather that we should be inviting AI to our meetings, okay? So what I mean by that is, I mean, that's very literally, right? When you have a meeting, you can have an AI, you know, summarizing tool that helps you, and Zoom already, by the way, has this built in, and Teams has it built in as well. You can turn it on, it's very easy. But beyond that is every time you have an activity that requires, you know, searching large data sets or writing documents or analyzing data, ask yourself, first of all, what can we do can AI help us here, and how can it help us? Okay, I shared in the chat, and I'll share it here with everybody who's with us today, a tool called, you know, oftentimes people ask me, well, Avi, is there a tool for X? Is there a tool for Y? There are so many tools out there that I can't keep track of most of them. But there's a very good website that I highly recommend you checking out called there'sanaIforthat.com. Again, there'sanaIforthat.com. It's a website which is an AI tool to help you find AI tools. So it's a super AI tool. And if you ask yourself, well, is there a tool that can help me with whatever it is, right? Diagnoses. Is there a tool that can help with transcription? Is there a tool that can help with translation? There are oftentimes you can find it will give you an output of all the AI tools that do whatever it is that you're looking to do, assuming there is such an AI tool out there. So for visualizations, etc. So I highly recommend, if you have any questions about, is there an AI tool? Do a search and there's an AI tool for that. See what comes up, and you can experiment with the tools that are there. Some tools are better, some tools are worse. You have to kind of look around and experiment. Okay, so again, my recommendation is to invite AI to the meetings that you have and make it part of what you do. AI tools can help researchers and research managers, also in applying for funding. So if you're ever applying for funding from local or European grant partners, they can help with coming up with new and novel creative ideas, developing those proposals, implementing proposals, and also evaluating proposals for quality. But of course, the question we always need to ask ourselves with every tool is, can I trust this tool? And trust doesn't necessarily mean that it's always giving me the right answer, because as we saw before, With GPT, maybe what I want to be doing with it is editing. So it's not about right or wrong, it's about style. And the rule that I built for myself, which you're welcome to borrow or share, is what I call the 10 by 5 rule. So the 10 by 5 rule says as follows. The first part, the 10 part, is I play around or I experiment with every tool that I want to consider at least 10 hours. Now that may sound like a very long time, but it's actually not so long. I'm sure that all of you have experimented with GPT or something similar for at least 10 hours. You may have experimented with other tools already. In today's training, that's a couple hours. Because it takes some time. It takes some time to get used to how to prompt and what the output's going to be and how to optimize your work with the tool. So if it's a tool that someone comes highly recommended, or that we learned together here, or that people in your office are using, take the time. Again, it doesn't need to be one day of 10 hours. The opposite, I would say, you prompt a little bit here, a little bit there, you experiment, you play around, and you see where it leads you in the long term. So that's the 10. The 5 is I need to be able to get a predictable output, or an output that I can trust at least 5 times in a row. So what I mean by that is, if I'm going to use Perplexity, I want to make sure that 5 times in a row I can ask it a research question and get out a reasonable research answer. Now, earlier today we saw a question that didn't work so well. It only gave you 2 sources for whatever reason. So I'm going to want to continue experimenting till I feel like I have understood the tool well enough so that I can get it to consistently give me the answers that I want. Again, answers can be scientific, factual answers. They can be creative answers. There's a tool for finding a journal, for my article. There's all sorts of different tools. So different successes will be dependent on which tool you're using and what it's supposed to accomplish. And if you find yourself over and over trying and something not working for you, I suggest either asking a colleague or a friend, right? What am I doing not right here? How can I improve the way that I'm interacting? Or maybe it's just not a mature enough tool yet. Maybe it's not good enough. Maybe it solves a pain point, but it's just not robust enough for me to trust it, right? So that's also. So I'll give you an example. With formatting papers, and that's a big annoying thing that we need to do. We need to, right? We've got a bibliography and we need to structure it in exactly the way it's supposed to be written. I haven't found a great AI tool for that yet. Okay, there are AI tools that say they do it. I never find that they do such a good job. Okay, so I've learned this is not a good use case for AI, right? Or at least no one's built it well enough yet, let's say. And for the last slide for today, I want to take a step back for a minute after all that we've learned so far this morning about different generative AI approaches, the frontier model approach of large language models, where it's a big word salad on the one hand, and the RAG approach of looking at very specific sources and trying to get answers from those sources on the other, and ask ourselves, what is not only, right, we think a lot about the risks, and we're going to talk later today about the risks and dangers of using artificial intelligence. But I also want to think about what are the risks if we don't, if we say, you know what, I'm too old for this, or I tried it, doesn't work for me. I think there's a risk there as well. And the story I like to tell is Professor Tu Youyou. Is anyone here familiar with Professor Tu Youyou?
Her work lost, yeah?
Sorry?
Her scientific work lost in nature, yeah?
Was it lost, you're saying?
Yeah, in nature
No worries. So I'll tell you about Professor Youyou. Professor Youyou is my science hero, I like to say. And I don't think that she gets enough credit around the world, so I like to talk about her. But also, it's a lesson in my mind about AI. In the 70s and 80s, Professor Youyou was at the Chinese Academy of Natural Sciences. And she came across a chemical compound called artemisinin. Does anyone know what artemisinin is used for? Artemisinin is used as the main component to treat malaria. Okay, so she essentially she discovered the cure for malaria. Now, what's shocking about her story is that because she was in China, she published in Chinese. I'm not sure if it was because you're familiar with the story. So she published in Chinese. She didn't, now I don't know whether she published in Chinese because she didn't have English. Maybe her English wasn't strong enough. Maybe the government required Chinese publication. That happens in China not infrequently. There's a lot of really good research, or some of it's good, some of it's not good, but there's a lot of research that's being published in languages other than English that we might not have access to. And in her case, no one read about her research. No one found it. How do we know that? It didn't get cited. There's no citation. There were no citations at the time. It took many years until an American researcher was doing a systematic review of malaria in general, and came across her research and said, "Oh my God, Professor Yu has a cure for malaria. We didn't know." The drug companies didn't know, right? All the people who are paid the big money in order to learn about these things. And I think about, had we had the search tools, right, like Perplexity back then. I think about some of the tools, had she had easy and cheap translation available to her, would we have gotten a cure for malaria years earlier? And I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe the answer is yes. And so there's big downsides to AI. And again, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at AI, right, irresponsible, or AI fails, or like we saw before, how to use AI like an idiot. That can have its dangers. But I think there's an equal and opposite danger of saying, you know what, I'm not doing this, right? Someone else can worry about this. I think it's on each and every one of us, both as individuals, but also within our institutions, to think about how do we integrate AI responsibly. Okay, that takes us to lunch. So thank you for your attention this morning. Lunch is from now until 2:15, and then we will circle back around and for our afternoon session from 2:15 to 4, correct? Great, thank you. Had a nice, enjoyable lunch. Just to start off the afternoon, I know that sometimes I speak a bit quickly, so I apologize. I'll try and speak a bit more slowly. I know that when I'm hearing something in a second language, it often takes time to process. If at any point you want me to repeat something or you have a question, please don't hesitate. Okay, I'm here to help, and if there's something that I went over too quickly or you didn't understand, don't be shy. Chances are someone else also maybe didn't understand, and you're welcome to ask. Okay?
Avi, I have one request.
Yes.
Maybe in the end of the day, you will have some short summary.
Yes, of course. Yeah, and I think it might be a good idea to summarize what we've learned so far, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do this afternoon. So, what we saw this morning was two different approaches to generative AI. The first approach we call the frontier model, the large language model approach. And again, we talked there about ChatGPT and Claude, and we said that those tools are great for creative work, are great for brainstorming work, are helpful to us when we have a lot of data and when we get some good insights from it. When we have the information in front of us, that we can feed it in order to be successful. The second approach to generative AI is the RAG approach, the RAG model, the retrieved augmented generation model. And there, what we're doing is we're saying we have a question for the world we don't know the answer to. And we want to know what the sources available to us say about this question. So think about how, the process that we went through before of asking a research question, what that would look like on Google and what that looks like on Perplexity. And can that help us to speed up and make ourselves more efficient in our process of getting answers to research questions quickly and professionally? What I'd like to do now in the session that we have this afternoon is I'd like to continue to a few additional topics. The first thing I'd like to do, it's a brand new presentation that I just put together a few weeks ago, is how do I know which model I should be choosing? There's so many options, there's so many possibilities, right? I could go with ChatGPT, I could go with Claude, I could go with, right? How do I make that decision about what's right for me or what's right for my organization? That's really important because we want to make sure we're thinking about this intelligently. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves if we want to write with GPT or if we want to do anything with these tools, how do we prompt? What are the secrets to a successful prompt which will allow us to get the best out of these tools? Because no matter what tool we use, We need to make sure that we're prompting it in a way that's successful. We'll then hopefully have time for learning one or two more tools, okay, that can help us with our academic writing, grant writing, article writing, and also presentations, okay? And I want to finish off the day by talking about privacy and some of the issues around AI that we need to be aware of. So that's a lot to do in a short amount of time. We'll do the best job that we can. So here in front of you is a table of all the different tools, okay, or the main language models, the main frontier models that are available to us today, including GPT, Copilot. You don't need to take a picture, you don't need to memorize. I will send Eka all of the slides. You'll have it available to you for as long as you want. And also be aware that this changes, this table changes, so I'll try and update it from time to time. But essentially it's a table which shows us the different functionalities and abilities of the different tools. And sometimes the way that we go about choosing a tool isn't always the smartest. So what I want to take you through now is what are the different kinds of features that different tools have. And I want you to ask yourself, is this something that's important to me? Is this something I have to have? Or is this something that I want to have, but I don't really need it? Okay? And once you make a list for yourself and say, okay, do I need this feature? Do I need this feature? Do I need this feature? Then you can go back to my table that I showed you at the beginning and say, okay, which tool is going to has the most features that I need? And that's the way you should be deciding which tool to buy. Okay, so it's not so much which tool does the best job. They all do similar jobs, but they have different tools have different functionalities, different things they can do. So the first functionality you might want to look out for is what's called live mode. Okay, live mode, I'm not going to play the video for you, but it's a AI interacting with the dog. You saw the AI with the student before. And the idea behind live mode is that I can pick up my phone here, okay, and GPT. I can go onto my app, okay, and I can say, here, we can try it. Let's see if it'll work. Can you please have a look at the room around us and tell me what country we are in? Okay, it's telling me that it can't, but if I pushed it enough, it would try. Okay, the idea here, let me see, maybe if I did the video. Okay, take another look at the room's appearance and tell me if you can figure out what country I'm in.
And who is prettier in the room?
Go ahead. Give me your best guess of where I am.
I can't get your location based on the room. If there's something else you'd like to know, feel free to ask.
Show the flags.
What'd you say?
Flags show.
Yes. Okay. Oh, all right. That's good. All right. Take a look at these flags and now tell me where I am. Okay, one second. I'm going to give you a better view of the flags, all right? And you're going to tell me where I am. We're making it very easy for him.
I can see the European Union flag and the flag of Georgia. So it looks like you might be in Georgia.
Okay, all right. There we go. Oh, we got it eventually. Actually, I was very impressed. I uploaded a picture of my daughter in our we've got mountains in the back of our house, and I kept on pushing it, and it actually figured out to the city. It knew what city we were in without any other information, just based on the picture with a mountain in the background. So it can do some pretty impressive things. Anyway, live mode is very cool because I can use it in all sorts of different situations. I'm with a patient. Instead of just giving him the case report, maybe I can, here's the patient, right? Here, take a look at this skin irritation, right? How would you, right? What do you think? It's almost like having a live AI doctor. I'm not saying that everyone should start doing this tomorrow, but I'm saying these are the kind of functionalities that could potentially be useful. So that's the first kind, live mode. Okay, the second one is reasoning. We talked about reasoning. We saw reasoning. All of you saw reasoning this morning with Perplexity. Again, what's the idea behind reasoning? Reasoning is, instead of just question answer, it's, okay, in order to answer this question, I need to ask 30 more questions. I need to then go fetch all the answers to that question, then I can answer your original question. It's kind of how we work as scientists, right? Some tools have reasoning, some tools do not. Okay, so that's also something you might want to take into account. You might see it as this tool works better, gives me better answers, and that tool doesn't. Oftentimes, that has to do with whether it has reasoning capabilities or it doesn't have reasoning capabilities. Now, it's important to note the reasoning comes with a cost. Every question that it asks is using GPUs, is using, it costs the company's money. So unfortunately, the more reasoning a tool uses, the more chances you're not going to be able to do as much with it for free. Okay? So again, it's a trade-off that you need to decide. Okay, here's a really cute example. It's a little bit small here, where the question is, say something to delight me in 7 words. Okay? And you see, it goes through, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but it goes through a whole reasoning process just to come up with something creative to say. You want it to make sure it's not too cheesy, you want it to make sure it was creative, it was fun. Okay, and at the end, it said, fireflies trace constellations in quiet night conversation. That's like a poetic, sentence. But in order to get there, it went through a whole process. So we see it's not only for research. The next question we need to ask ourselves is, does the tool have web access or not? Meaning, is it just a database? Did it just create this huge pool of content and then it's just drawing from that content? Or does it also connect to the world, to the wider world, and be able to answer, what happened in the, who's the new Prime Minister of Canada, right? Who just got elected yesterday, right? Only if it has connection to the web will it be able to answer that question. Some tools do, some tools do not. Okay, another capability that's worth checking into is image generation. Can the tool create pictures? Again, this may be important to you, may not be important to you. Here's an example of the same exact prompt with 3 different outputs. So this is asking for a beaver sitting on a pool toy in a pool. Okay, sitting on a floaty in a pool. GPT came up with this. Grok came up with this. Gemini came up with this. All theoretically accurate, but you can tell there's difference in terms of how realistic. So in this case, Grok actually looks the most realistic, I would say, well, the least AI. Whereas, I don't know, there's something about the GPT one where I would say it feels a little bit more AI. Again, if image generation and creation is important to you, that might be something that's worth testing. Its ability to code and do data analysis. Again, different tools. Some of them are better at it, some of them are not as good at it. GPT actually happens to be pretty good at writing code and reviewing code, editing code, finding mistakes in code. Especially the newer versions, the more powerful versions of ChatGPT can actually, I've seen that it can find mistakes in code even within published academic papers, which is very cool. By the way, there's this whole project you should just know about. It's called the Black Spatula Project. It's a brand new project. What they're trying to do is they're trying to use AI to go back over all of the existing literature and find all the mistakes. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I'm part of the WhatsApp group, and it's going to get really interesting really quickly when we start finding all sorts of problems in peer-reviewed research, which we have just accepted for the last 25 years. I'm not saying that tomorrow that's going to happen, but it's a very interesting project. Anyway, so yeah, code and data analysis. Again, I'm not going into how to do each one of these things. It's more about how do I decide which. I want you to think about each capability that I'm showing you. Do I care about this? Is this helpful to me? Will I use it? If yes, give yourself a check. If no, give yourself an X. Okay? And then when you go back to the table, you can say, okay, yeah, this is something that I would this is something that's important to me, so I'm going to make sure that the tool I choose has that capability, or, nah, I don't really care, so I don't necessarily need it. Okay, multimodality. So we talked about this a little bit before. Multimodality is another way of saying what media inputs can it receive and what outputs can it put out. So now we tend to think, as scientists, we tend to think about text. Okay, but we've already seen we can input audio. We can input video. We can input pictures. Okay, we can say, here's here's an image, right? Find me, right? Like the radiology, right? Does this person show early signs of cancer, right? So not every tool is multimodal. Not every tool can input, can receive different kinds of files, and not every tool can output different kinds of files. So again, that's something you want to be considering in terms of what it can do, what it can understand. Just to show you an example, by the way, is you can see here on this image, okay? So you can't see this text probably. So can anyone tell me what this image is? The one on the left. Sorry?
Plane on the right.
Okay, so the plane's on the right. What's this on the left? Yeah, okay, so it's also a plane, but I'm going to guess that if you didn't have this picture, you wouldn't know what this is. Is that fair? Right? This is a very hard picture. Okay, so now let's see. This is based on this image. This is in GPT, if I'm not mistaken. I can see what appears to be aircraft seating or cabin interior with a gray fabric or textile material visible. Okay? It knows that it's a plane. Okay? Which is impressive. There's not really that much here to know it's a plane. It can't tell you too much about the plane, because it's, right? But again, let's think about this in a scientific context. Doesn't have that much information, but can do some pretty advanced diagnostics, right? What does that mean in terms of, and I'd be curious if any of you have, that deal with images on an ongoing basis, if you've uploaded it and asked for insights, ask it to understand what it is. Here it gave it more information, so or the picture was a little bit kind of more detailed, not tons, right? You can see the no smoking sign here. And from this it knew which plane it was, which model, what year it was created, where the lighting is, what kind of lighting it's using. So it's really, right, impressive from a small picture. So again here, another function that not every tool has, but some tools have, is multimodality. If that's important to you, you're going to want to take it into consideration. The last one that we're going to discuss today, and of course, and I promise you, we will get to the topic of privacy, but is the question of privacy. Not all tools are, people ask me all the time, but how do I make sure, right, is it safe? And that's a very hard question to answer, because I'd have to answer 10 different answers to 10 different tools that we're going to learn. So it's important to understand that there are different levels of privacy. Each company is its own company. They come up with their own policy. They have their own rules. Okay, so I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, did anyone here hear about DeepSeek? Okay, the Chinese model. So DeepSeek made a lot of news around the world when it was released, because they were able to, first of all, it was free. So it was free, to use a lot more than GPT. And it seemingly was just as good. And people got super excited, and their stock price went crazy, and all the other stocks of all the other companies went way down. And then the next day or two, a day or two later, someone posted, actually, if you ask any questions that are in any way critical about the Chinese government, it censors you, or it censors the answer, okay? Because it's a Chinese product. So then everyone's like, oh, wait. So this is not only, so there's two problems. First of all is, how do we know the answers aren't being manipulated? But number two is, my data, if it's a Chinese company, is probably going straight to the Chinese government, okay? So the point is that just because a tool is very powerful and has a lot of functionality, doesn't necessarily mean we should be using it. Okay, we need to think carefully before we go ahead and use it. Okay, so just to go over the different things that we saw. Okay, what are the capabilities that we want to be looking for? So again, this going back to the chart. Does it have live mode? Okay, meaning can it see what's in front of me? Right, like we saw with the flags. Does it have the reasoning capability, like we saw with perplexity? Right? Can it think? Go through that thinking process the same way that a human would. Okay? Can it generate images? And if so, what's the quality of those images? Can it do deep research, like we saw with perplexity this morning? Some tools can, some tools cannot. Can it do code at a high level and data analysis? I put that together. Is it multimodal? Etc. So there's all sorts of different kind of variables to take into account. I personally started with GPT. I'm still happy with GPT, so I don't look around too much. I don't think it'd be possible for me to track each and every tool, each and every, but I know people who much prefer Claude, for example. Just to give you an example, Claude has a very large context window. So if you work with a lot of materials, it does a better job at understanding very large, if you've got, tons of, old patient files. And again, obviously, assuming that you have permission to use them, maybe Claude would be better. So there is some testing that needs to be involved, but at least as a first step, these are kind of some of the factors to take into account. Again, my suggestion to you, I'll send this to Eka. Eka will send it out or we'll add it to the shared folder. You'll be able to look through, say, okay, here are the things that are important to me, look through the chart, see which ones are going to be most relevant to you, and then you can decide on which tool, at least to start with, okay? You don't need to marry that tool. You can always change later, but at least, it makes sense to use the tools that are going to be most helpful to you, okay? Wonderful. Are there any questions about how to choose the best frontier model? Okay, and again, just to remind everybody, these are tools, when we're talking about frontier models, these are what are called the generic models. I'm not talking right now about tools that are specifically created to help you, scientists, do data analysis. No, I'm talking about these models that do a lot of different things. These are some of the components that you want to take into account. Okay. Were there any questions on the chat?
Just one comment,
yes,
please. So we'll have another session on Wednesday, and I will share exact tools which can be incorporated in terms of the research or publications, etc., etc. So now we have the pre-master class session, which means that we'll have now the overall review of AI tools, but we will work more specifically on that on Wednesday. So you will still have some time to digest all the information within the context of research and publications.
Thanks, Eka. Yes, yes, on Wednesday is really going to be a focus on specific tools. We'll also see a few more tools today, hopefully. Okay, as you have seen already, what we're obviously it's important to choose which tool is best for you. And we're not going to do that here together today. You'll take your time afterwards, you'll experiment, you'll play around, you'll see which one, you'll compare it to the chart and you'll decide. But no matter what tool you decide upon, it's critical that you know how to prompt well. Okay, and I think people sometimes overlook this. They say, okay, just tell it what I want, and either it does a good job, either it knows what I'm doing, or it doesn't know. And whenever someone says, I tried something, but it gave me something totally wrong, my first question to them is always, show me your prompt, and I'll show you where you need to improve. And that's not because we did anything wrong, the opposite. Prompting is not a natural thing that we do. There are some people who say, well, you got to bring in a prompt engineer, or you need to learn prompt engineering. Okay, that's the skill of the future. I'm not sure. Okay, I don't necessarily believe in that. I definitely think that practicing prompting can be very helpful, but I also think that anyone can become a good prompter. You don't need to have experience prompting. You don't need to be a computer scientist. You just need to learn basic rules for what it is that you need to put into a prompt in order to get the best output. And this doesn't matter what tool that you're using. Any tool that you're using, you need to put in a good prompt. That's the foundation. That's the baseline of using AI properly. So how do we do that? The way I like to think about it is it's like an intern on their first day. Okay? A resident on their first day, whatever, right? Whatever analogy you want to give, a student, their first day of class. Now, on the one hand, the student doesn't know anything. Nothing. Okay? You have to teach them intro to, biology, intro to chemistry, right? They know nothing right now. On the other hand, they have an infinite IQ. You start talking to them and you realize this person is beyond the smartest person that I ever met. So now the question is, how do I as a teacher, right, or as a, right, how do I get the most out of the student? Or how do I get the most out of this intern? What do I need to do to teach them in order that they can have enough information, understanding, knowledge, in order for them to use their brilliance? Okay, that's the way that I like to think about how we're supposed to prompt. Don't assume that it knows. The fact that it has something in its memory doesn't mean that it knows. Okay? So how do we get the best out of these tools? So let me show you. And this is a strategy that I built over many, many months, okay? In trying to reflect on the prompts that I've written and ask myself a simple question. Which prompts worked? Which prompts didn't work? And what was it about those prompts that really made it work? Okay? And this is what I came up with. The 8 rules of prompting. Okay? You do these, you print these out, you put it next to your computer, right? You have it next to you. I promise you, the outputs that you get, okay, the answers that you get, the chats that you have, will be more efficient. You'll spend less time wasting time on the back and forth with the chatbot, and you'll get better answers. Why? It's not because there's some secret here. It's because I'm giving it context. I'm giving it details. The secret to a good prompt, the secret to a strong prompt is give it information, give it details. You want to write a part of an article? Give it details. You want to write, you want to edit your letter to your boss? Give it details, give it context. In that way, it's very similar to the human brain. The more context we have, the better decisions we can make, the better information we can give out. Okay, so let's go through one at a time these rules. I'll then show you an example of a good prompt, and then I want you to practice your own prompting so that you can write something, okay? So that you can write something that can be helpful to you, okay? And again, this is going to be, regardless of tool, this is going to be very helpful. All right, so rule number 1 is what we call role, okay? Role essentially means who are you? Explain very explicitly who you are. I am a biomedical researcher. I am a lab manager. I am, okay? Examples, details. I'm a lab manager that deals with, in vitro experiments. Give it. The more details, the better. You don't need to go crazy. It doesn't need to be a 5-page prompt now. Okay, you don't need to give it your entire bio and what you ate for lunch yesterday. Okay, within reason. Any information you think would add helpful context is helpful. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is goal. Okay, what do I mean by goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Okay, are you trying to brainstorm? Are you trying to write a document? Are you trying to edit a document? Are you trying to transcribe an interview? Are you trying to come up with creative ways to get your boss fired? Okay, whatever it may be, whatever activity you want to be doing, give it a goal. Again, here too, detail. Okay, be specific. Even more specific than you would be with a person. Okay, pretend like, here's the way I would think about it. Pretend like me and you were sitting over dinner tonight and you were trying to explain to me your job. What would you need to tell me in order for me to get it? Okay, in order for me to understand. I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a doctor. How would I get a deep understanding of what you do? Be descriptive, explain. The third rule is level. Okay, what I mean by level is what is the level of the target audience? Who am I speaking to? Who is going to be reading whatever it is that maybe it's just for me, that's fine. You can tell it, this is just for me. But if I'm writing a document, let's say for my colleagues, well then there's a certain level, there's certain professionalism. If I'm writing a document for a patient-facing document, well then I need to use much simpler, less scientific language. I need to use language they're going to understand, right? Make it simple. If I'm applying for a grant and I know that my grant is going to be reviewed by a panel of the top professors in the world, well then I better darn make sure that I'm using the right language, right? I'm using the right terms, right? So it's really important to explain who is going to be reading this document or who's going to be reading this output and what their level of education or level of understanding is about the topic that I want to be writing about. The fourth rule, okay, so again, let's go over the first three again, just so that we summarize. Number one is role, who are you? Number two is goal, what are you trying to accomplish? And number three is level, what is should the writing level be on? And that has to do with who the target audience is. Who am I trying to speak to? The fourth, so those components maybe you've done in the past. Maybe you knew about it, maybe you didn't know about it, but you probably have done someone in the past. The fourth one is probably new for you. The fourth one is called few-shot prompting. Few-shot prompting is a term from computer sciences. Okay, that's a technical term, which is a fancy way of saying use examples. Okay, if you have, use an example. So what I mean by that is if you are going to submit a grant proposal for funding, all right, and you have if you have a proposal that has been funded in the past, give it to the GPT, give it to the large language model. It gives it understanding and context. How should it be written? What should it look like? What is acceptable and not acceptable practices? I've seen people do this. They put in the article from the top, kind of researcher in their field, and they say, I want it to be in this kind of style. And then we can actually almost, not copy obviously, but almost like emulate that style. Now, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, sometimes you can put in one example. If you have multiple examples, you can put in multiple examples. You don't need to go crazy. You don't need to put in 20 examples, okay? 1, 2, 3 examples is fine. But I have seen, so I'll give you, you asked before, Eka, about translation. So when we were doing testing internally at our company, we saw that as soon as we started putting in examples of here's what scientific translation is, good scientific translation in this field, and then we would say, okay, here's example 1 of the source text, here's example 1 of the target text. Okay, if there's something I've translated in the past, I was happy with. I edited it. Here's example 2, source text, here's example 2, target text. And now here's a new text. The translation was much, much better. Okay, because you've given it context, you give it more understanding. So that's few-shot prompting. Give it an example of something that worked for you in the past, or that worked for someone else in the past, or that's an example of best practice in this field. That's number 4. Number 5 is personalization. Okay, so personalization means how do you make it your own? Sometimes one of the frustrating parts for people who try to write with AI tools is they say, it's fine, it's good. It may even be written very well, but it doesn't sound like me. It's not the way I would have written it, and it bothers me. So what I suggest is your sample that you give, first of all, you can use a sample that's your own writing. You can say, I want you to kind of copy or emulate this writing. Or you can tell it a little bit about what kind of style you prefer. You prefer more formal, less formal. You prefer for it to be very opinionated or not, or more objective. You can tell it a certain style. By the way, that's what makes GPT so unique, right? When I use any other translation tool or any other editing tool, it's like, just edit. Either I like it or I don't like it. Here, I can actually customize. I can say, this is how I like doing things. Explain how you like to do things. If you were to do this not in GPT, what would the steps be? Or how would you approach this challenge? Right? If you explain it to that personalizes it. Number 6 is constraints. Constraints are those things you don't want it to do. Okay? We all get outputs from large language models where it's like, I didn't want that. Okay? I asked for, I wanted it to write me the discussion section of my article, and it gave me a bunch of bullet points. Well, that's very not helpful. Okay? I wanted it to write that section in narrative form. So what do? What I do is, instead of going and getting into a long fight and argument with the GPT, which is what people usually do, I go back to my original prompt, okay, and I say, how can I edit this prompt that I originally wrote, okay, so that it will do what I wanted it to do properly. So what I might say is, don't give me any bullet points, don't give me a summary, okay, and then, yes, do it in narrative form. Yes, have long paragraphs, whatever it is that's important for me that it has. Number 6 is Okay, so that's constraints. That's what we talked about. Number 7, the 7th rule is level of creativity or critique. There are times where I say, you know what, go crazy. I'm happy for you to give me ideas, to think out of the box, to be creative. And there are times where I just want it to do exactly what I want it to do, right? And I don't want you to start getting creative. And depending on the circumstances, I might want to be more creative, less creative, right? Same thing when it comes to critique. There are times where I actually will, if I have, let's say, the draft of an article. So I had this a few weeks ago where I was writing this article and I wanted it to critique my draft. I said, please be reviewer too. I want you to challenge every premise of my paper. Okay, I want you to attack it. I want you to tell me where all the weak points are. I want you to tell me what the reviewers are going to have a hard time with. I even uploaded a review template from a publisher with like the criteria of how it's going to be checked. And I said, critique me on every point. You can do it in a friendly way. You can give me suggestions for how to improve the paper. That's fine. But I wanted it to be critical because I wanted to learn. And I don't want to get to the editor of the journal and then to come back and say, well, that's not going to work. Okay? So that's level of creativity or critique. That's really important. And finally, the last thing that I want to share with you is what I call chain of thought prompting. This is also a term from computer science. Chain of thought prompting essentially says, don't try and stuff everything that you want to do into one single prompt. Think about it as a process with steps, okay? So we have a tendency to think we've got one time to write a prompt. We're going to say, write me an article. We ask it to write an article. We give it all the information, and then it does a really bad job. And then we say, what happened? And the answer is because the same way writing an article takes steps, right, in the real world, it needs to take steps in the GPT, right, with AI as well. So I may say, first we're going to write an article together. That's fine. That's great. Let's first focus on the results section. That's the easiest. I got the data. Let's start with the results, okay? Here was my research question. Here's my data. Right, let's start working together. Okay, you might go through a few iterations of, okay, maybe you want to help it with some of the analysis. Maybe you want to help it create some tables for you. There's different steps that we might want to do with it. Once we finish that, we say, okay, now it's time to go on to the next step. The next step is going to be the discussion section, whatever it may be. Okay, and obviously in each section of the article writing, we're going to want to feed it, right, with the materials that it needs in order to be successful. If I were to try to feed it all of the articles that I've read, and the guidelines for the journal, and my draft of the paper, and my data, it won't work. It won't work. If I try to do it all in one step, it won't work because it's overwhelmed. It doesn't know where to turn for what. It doesn't understand the process. So that's why it's a weird thing, because you would think, of course it knows how to write an academic article. It has millions of academic articles in its brain. Well, yes, but it doesn't know how to go through that step-by-step process. It's on you to lead it through that step-by-step process, which is why I always say it's important for you to keep in mind that you are the subject expert, okay, and you can do this better than someone else, a prompt engineer that makes $150,000 a year can do, because they don't know what the process of writing an academic article looks like, okay? So so each one of us, because of our subject expertise, can actually become prompt engineering experts in our field, okay? Much better than anyone from the outside could. So let me show you an example. First of all, before I get to the example of a prompt, does anyone have any questions on any of the rules? Yeah.
I had a question about like giving it. Should I talk in the microphone?
Yeah, you can. Just for the people on Zoom.
So when I give it an example for something, won't it then narrow its view and just focus on that example I gave it, or it will still do all the other things it would?
Really good question. So really good question, right? How do I make sure that the example doesn't limit it too much, right? That it's like, oh, it's just going to copy and paste. I ran into this exact mistake where I gave it a paper as an example. I wasn't clear enough about what elements I wanted it to to copy. Again, copy is not the right word because it's never copying. It's sort of similar to, and I wasn't clear enough about it, and it started mixing up my research with the example, and then it was like a total mess, right? So I went back to the prompt and I said, okay, what did I do wrong here? And I realized I wasn't clear enough what I wanted to do with this example. Like, did I want to borrow the data? Did I want to borrow the structure? Did I want to borrow the style? So what I recommend is, it all depends on what you're using it for. If you say, this is the kind of writing style that I want to use, so be very explicit. Say, I want you to copy this writing style. Okay, don't look at not the content's not important, but this style is what I want you to do in your output. That's one option. Option number two is, maybe I do want to, maybe I'm writing my discussion and I actually am uploading an example article as something that I want to incorporate into my discussion. So I might ask it, how would you recommend to incorporate the content of this article into my discussion here, because I'm not figuring out how to tie it all together. So again, it's just about being explicit, being very detail oriented and saying, not only here's an example, but what do you want it to copy? Does that make sense? Okay. And again, this always goes back to what's our challenge, right? Sometimes we feel like we need to change the research or the way we do research or who we are to make ourselves appropriate for the AI tool. No, the opposite. We need to ask ourselves, what is our challenge? What's hard for us, right? Each one of us has parts of our job that are more difficult and parts of our job that are easier, or parts of the research process that we enjoy more, parts that are less. So if your challenge is writing, so then you want to bring an example of a well-written paper, okay? If your challenge is data analysis, right, you want to, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's take, any other questions before I move on? Okay, so let me just quickly show you an example of a prompt. This isn't even necessarily the best prompt in the world, but it includes the different parts of the rule that I shared. And then as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to give you time. What I want you to do is I want each of you to team up with the person next to you. If you have two people in your row, that's also fine. Okay, and I want you to work together to write a strong prompt using the rules that we just learned. Okay? But first, let's look at an example. So, the example is, you are a microbiology researcher. Now, it doesn't really matter if you say I am or you are. It's okay. It doesn't matter if it's first person, third person, as long as it's, or second person, as long as it's clear. You are a microbiology researcher. Okay, so that's the role. That's who am I? Writing a starting letter of inquiry for a grant proposal for funding. The proposal will be reviewed by a panel of top scientists in the field. So that is number 3, that is the level. Who are the people I'm writing to? So it explains to them this needs to be really good, right? It needs to be very scientific. It needs to have all the right terms. I want you to write an initial one-pager. Okay, so this is the letter of intent maybe, right? So that's the goal. That's what I wanted to accomplish, right? Right now, the task is to write the letter of intent so that it's accepted, so that we can write the full proposal. I want you to write an initial one-pager on the topic of the main symptoms of colon cancer. The following, right, or the attached, assuming I would attach a document to this, is a model of a well-written one-pager that you can model your output around. So here's something that I define as being very well-written, so you understand what I am expecting when you write your one-pager for me. The one-pager should focus on the most updated research and reflect my writing in terms of writing style and structure. Here, I might give it an example of my writing. Or I might detail or describe what I expect in terms of what should be the way this should be structured. Don't include an introduction or conclusion. So here I would say, right, here's my constraints. Here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to say, yes, I'd love to do this for you. For me, every output is valuable. I don't want to be wasting time on pleasantries, on niceties, right? I want it to get straight to work. And why is that, by the way? Because oftentimes, if I wanted to write a longer text, every word matters. So it maxes out at about 1,000 words, 1,200 words. I mean, you can't, if you were to ask it to write a book, it wouldn't do it for you, right? Or it would not do it very well, right? It has a certain limitation. So for me, if I want to write, again, a 3-4 page article, I don't want it wasting time on, on telling me what it's going to do. I just want to get straight to it. So I tell it, don't include an introduction or a conclusion. Okay? So this is an example, and obviously I would need to give it some materials, right? I didn't show you the materials that I'd give it, but I'd give it maybe an example of my writing. I'd give it a best practices research article or a letter of intent that I may have. If I don't have it, I don't have it. There's nothing I can do, right? But if I can find something online, or if I have something that I've done previously that can help me, all that is helpful context in order for the tool itself to know how to do a good job when it goes to write the new activity. Okay? Are there any questions on the rules, the best practices, the prompting playbook, or on the example that I just gave? Good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is as follows. Right now it's 3:05. What I'd like to do is I'd like to give everyone from now until 3:20 match up with the person next to you in the row. If you don't have someone in your row, right, move forward a row, move back a row. You can work in groups of 2, 3, 4. I think is all fine. Whatever works best for you. Spend 2 or 3 minutes thinking about what is a task that, don't just do it as something that you do once. Think about something that you would do more than once, where it's worth it to put in the time to write a really good prompt. Because what you can do once you have a really good prompt is you can use it again and again and again, right? You don't need to every time start the whole new process. You write the prompt, you work on the prompt very hard, you then have it, you save it in an Excel document or in a folder, wherever you want to save it, and then next time you have that same task, right? It gets much easier. You just throw in the prompt and it's done. So I've done this with people. People have used this, let's say, for writing recommendation letters. People have used this for writing letters for letters of intent for grant proposals. You could do it in Georgian, you could do it in English. You can use it to write different sections of your article, different sections of your grant, to review a protocol. There's a lot of different kind of use cases, so speak together with your colleagues about what you would want to try and create, okay? Work with the rules, try and make sure that you're incorporating as many of the rules as possible. You can't always do everything, okay? If you have any challenges, you run into any issues, raise your hand. I'm happy to come over and help. Okay, and last thing is, when you submit it to GPT, okay, or any other tool, whatever tool you want to use, when you actually upload it, when you actually are ready to put the prompt in, look at the answer, and instead of starting to get into an argument or starting to push the GPT to do what you want to do, reflect back on your original prompt and say, how can I edit? How can I revise my prompt in a way where next time it will do a better job answering my question or giving me the text that I wanted to write? Okay? So again, just to go over the instructions one more time, you'll pair up with people that are in your row or people next to you. Speak for 2 or 3 minutes about what kind of text you want to write. Try and write a prompt. Again, it can be in Georgian, it can be in English. It can be, you can write in Georgian but ask it to deliver in English. You could write in Georgian and ask it to deliver in Georgian. It doesn't matter, just be explicit. Tell it what you actually want it to do. Try and incorporate all of the different parts of a good prompt into your prompt. Get the answer, analyze it, think about it, and then say, how could I edit my prompt, rewrite the prompt, so that it would address those issues that you weren't happy with. Okay? All right, wonderful. Good luck, and again, so we'll have from now until 3:20, okay, to go ahead and do that. So that's 13 minutes. Oh, and in terms of the people online, in terms of the people on Zoom, probably makes sense each person can do it as an individual activity. That's also fine. So I can go through here, and I can see, okay, here are the leading researchers, at least in terms of their H-index, in terms of who's been cited the most in the top journals in the field. Maybe that's people that I want to be reading their work. Maybe these are people I want to be turning to for potential partnerships or consortium. Okay, I used very broad keywords, but you can get a lot more specific in terms of the keywords that you want to use to find the best people for your research. Okay? Now, the other feature I wanted to show you is the insights. So in addition to just getting a list of papers and a list of researchers, I can actually see some data So for those of you here who like crunching data, you can actually get some really good data points from using Synapse. So let's say, again, I want to search for papers. Let's get it a little bit more specific. Immune receptor, okay? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for articles that are published in the last 3 years. Okay, I'm gonna only look at original research articles. Actually, I might want to make this a little bit bigger. That's helpful when I can see. And I'm gonna look at immunosuppression as well. Let's add. Okay, and now I want to see what analysis. Okay, I don't want to do that. Sorry. I thought that was something that I could do. Here. Okay, I need to do it from here. No. All right. It is not letting me do it in the free version. It used to let me do it in the free version, so I apologize about that. It's also going to be here. Okay. Yeah, we can do it in trends. Okay. So we'll go about this in a slightly different way. There is a feature in Synapse called Synapse Trends. So essentially what I can do here is I can find particular trends in terms of publications in specific fields. So let's try out compare degenerative disease research trends. So I can see which degenerative diseases have been leading the publications over the certain period of time. So let's have a look here. So first of all, it's identified for me different diseases. It's told me, okay, the leading papers are in Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's. But even within that, you can see there's a big distinction. There's a big difference between the different papers. So for example, I can see that Parkinson's disease already has, almost 10,000 papers, okay, per year annually. Alzheimer's is sitting around 5,000, and where ALS has about 2,000. I can also track it over time. So I notice here that for whatever reasons, and you have to kind of pick apart this data and figure out why it is the way it is. I can see here that Parkinson's, right, in 2020, there was a big spike in Parkinson's publications, right? That may have to do with funding, that may have to do with areas of interest, right? And then actually a slight decline come to 2021. So that's also something that's interesting to note. And of course, here the 2024 data isn't necessarily complete yet because it still needs to be fed in. But it's really interesting, things you wouldn't necessarily expect in terms of, how kind of what I would call bird's eye view of how the subject area is being understood and determined. Again, I can here too filter if I decide, I really only want to see data from 2015. Okay, to date, I can go ahead and filter that. And then I see actually, interestingly enough, that the increases are less dramatic. But here I see, right, that Alzheimer's has actually had a bump up in the last few years. Now, if I scroll down here a little bit more, I can see that it breaks it down per different disease. So, for example, ALS, I see here that the top papers were in Lancet Neurology, Science, another paper in that Lancet Neurology, so I can actually find the top papers in that particular field. I can also look at the leading researchers in that field as well, and I can see again who might be leading the field, and this is broken down by the specific disease. So it's not just in one of the diseases. Each disease has its own breakdown of the leading researchers and leading fields, and as you can see here, there's all sorts of different kind of comparisons that I can run. I can compare next-gen computing, architecture trends, right? I can check out all this stuff. I encourage you, we're not going to go through it in depth. I'm not going to give you time right now, but after the next session, if you have time, I highly encourage you to go ahead and log into Synapse and actually experiment and play around. And in addition, the folks at Synapse have been kind enough to actually provide a discount for anyone who's interested. So if you do experiment with it and you want to recommend it to your institution, there is a special discount for the people who have done this training, the boot camp, in order to get access to Synapse. Also, if you want to bring it to your institution and have a trial period or time where you're playing around, you're practicing with it, you're seeing how it works, you're seeing if it's relevant and valuable for your institution, you could do that as well. So again, this is kind of using AI in a slightly different way. So instead of using AI, to write or to find papers, this is a way, well, first of all, you can find papers, right, with the advanced search that we saw before, with filtering, the advanced filtering options, which really give you power to really target your search in a very meaningful way, but then also in terms of the synapse trends. So in terms of seeing research trends within your field, especially if you're in an industry where you're trying to keep track and say, okay, where is the funding going and where is the publication energies being spent and how has that changed over time? It's a really good way to get insights and to compare and contrast between different areas and different subjects. Are there any questions on Synapse before we move on to our last class for today? No? Great, fantastic. So again, we'll be in touch with further information about Synapse via email, so be on the lookout for that. Okay. The last but not least, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I know it's been a long day, and I know that you probably have an email inbox that's filling up. So I do appreciate your patience, but I do think it's important for our last session today to really focus on some of the issues, some of the issues with working with generative AI. As you probably are able to tell by now, I'm what I would call very optimistic, right, about the use of artificial intelligence in research, in science, in biomedicine. However, I'll also say that it is irresponsible to not mention some of the downsides. And the downsides could be human downsides to AI, but also, right, the AI downsides to AI. Or I wouldn't even call it downsides. I would say some of the risks and how we make sure that we're acting responsibly and safely, and also how we make sure that we're respecting our own privacy, right? And making sure that what we get uploaded doesn't get sent on to people it's not supposed to. So the first thing I want to do, and you can all do this together with me, is if you are a user of ChatGPT, there is a way to increase your level of privacy within ChatGPT. Okay, and again, if you have it and you want to do it, you can do this alongside me right now. I'll show you exactly how to do it. In the top right-hand corner, you see there is a little circle here. Sometimes it has your profile picture, sometimes it has a letter. And you can go ahead and click on that. Okay, click on that little circle at the top right-hand corner. You're then going to want to go to Settings. Okay, so you click on Settings, and you should receive a screen that looks something like this. Once you've clicked on the circle with your picture or the letter, and then click on Settings, you click on Data Controls. Data Controls. Okay. Once you've clicked on Data Controls, there is a sentence here that says, improve the model for everyone. Okay, this is a nice way of saying we're going to learn from all of the data and all of the information that you give us in order to improve our own models. Okay, they've used very nice wording, but essentially they're harvesting your data. So if you want to protect your data at a higher level, it's very simple. All you need to do is click on this button and turn it off. Okay, and now they are legally not allowed to continue collecting data from you. I don't work for OpenAI, so I can't speak in their name. I hope that they're being straightforward and honest. But if you do this, this should give you an increased level of privacy, and I encourage anyone who's dealing with scientific information and your personal or private information to go ahead and do that. Whether or not doing that is enough, okay, in order for your institution to feel comfortable with your using AI on their data, that's something you have to ask internally within the organization. But this should increase the level of your privacy with your data. Yeah, there was a question?
Yes, I have a question. Usually when I search something, when I do some prompts to ChatGPT, it knows everything about me, like, to be honest, because whatever I ask, it remembers it and uses for the next searches. If I turn it off, is it like possible that it doesn't kind of remember any of my data because when I use?
It's a good question. Yes, you're correct. In general, ChatGPT is supposed to remember certain things about you from time to time. It doesn't always remember everything. It depends. I have not heard of an issue, people reporting an issue with the fact that if you turn this off, then all of a sudden it doesn't remember you. I think it's more a matter of whether your data is sent on back to their servers. I don't think it matters that for your own use, personal, but double check that. Meaning, I would turn it off and see if you feel like your experience is any different than it was before. To just double check. Okay? Yeah.
So again, follow-up question about remembering everything about you.
Yeah.
So it often says memory full for me for the paid version and free version as well. Or it always has memory full. And I guess it doesn't depend on the chats or scripts you had or how much you talked with it. It's the memory is about what it has learned about you, right? And
I had always understood memory to be more about filling up like space.
I just freed up the whole space. I have no chats, but the memory is still full. And I remember once previously, I think I deleted that memory, and it just forgot everything about me. Like
Interesting.
So I'm not sure because it was quite a time ago. So I just wanted to ask if you know.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure whether it has how exactly the memory works and what deleting, how that impacts it. Yeah, I would say maybe ask GPT itself. I don't know, but hopefully it'll give you the right answer. I'm sorry, yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, let's talk about a few other things you can do to make sure that your privacy is maintained at as high a level as possible. Okay, so the first thing that I recommend doing is always checking the terms and conditions of the tools that you use. It's boring. It's not something we like doing. A lot of times it's full of legal. But actually, you can find some really, or if you can't be bothered to do that, at least upload the terms and conditions into a tool like GPT and summarize it or ask questions about it, right? So certain tools, for example, Julius, which is a tool that we'll learn on Wednesday for data analysis, they keep your files for 1 hour and then they delete them. Okay, it's a very high level of privacy. Whereas other tools like GPT, unless you turned it off, like we just saw, they'll keep your files forever, okay, or they'll learn from them. So there's big differences between different tools. So it's important to look at the terms and conditions and see what are they allowed to do with your data. And is there a way to turn off them learning like we just saw? The second question you want to ask yourself is there a way to use GPT more privately? Okay, even within these tools, there are ways to use them more privately. So usually this is a institutional agreement. What they have is something called GPT EDU. And what happens is that's for educational or research institutions can take out a subscription or a license to ChatGPT and have a higher level of privacy. Essentially, none of the information is passed on whatsoever. The upside of that is it really solves a problem, a really big problem in a meaningful way, privacy. The downside is that we as individuals don't necessarily have that ability, right? That's more of a institutional advantage. So if there are enough people at your institution who are using it, it's definitely worth trying to get together as a group. It doesn't need to be a huge group. It doesn't necessarily need to be every single last person, but looking into the pricing to see, would there be able to be a possibility of a GPT EDU set up at your institution? The third point to think about when you're thinking about privacy is the information mine to share? Okay, what am I uploading? Is it personal patient data? Well, then I should really be thinking twice. I probably shouldn't be uploading it. Is it some idea that I have for a new research project which I haven't really done anything about and don't owe anyone anything? Yeah, then maybe it's perfectly fine to upload it. I think it's important to differentiate between your own information, your own research, and let's say if you're reviewing an article for someone else, right? If you're reviewing someone else's article and they haven't given you permission, then I think it's a problem, an ethical problem to use, to upload their data to their tool, to a different tool. If it's your own information, and if it's your own ideas, and if it's your own, right, and you legally aren't required, right, to keep those confidential, then maybe it's less of a problem. So there's a lot of different use cases, and you have to kind of think about each case, what makes the most sense for you. The next suggestion I have is considering redacting your content or revising it. What I mean by that is you can oftentimes anonymize a data set, right? You give it certain codes that you know what the codes are, but no one else does. So that if anyone else were to get this data set, even if they were to get it, even if the worst case scenario happened where you uploaded it and the next day it was everywhere online, okay? Which I wouldn't worry about that happening, but let's just say it happened. Even in such a case, I don't think if it was entirely anonymous and no one knew what those numbers were, the danger is less. Now, you may still be contractually obligated, right? You may still have issues with it. I'm not saying that everything's fine, but that's another way to protect yourself. And also, so that's for data privacy. Now, the biggest concern people have usually is, well, if I upload something, is it all of a sudden going to show up online somewhere? The answer to this question is 99.99% chance no. Okay. There aren't many cases where someone's uploaded something and then all of a sudden someone else has found it. In fact, there's no cases that I found where someone else found it by mistake, right? Like I uploaded, I don't know, my article that wasn't published, and then 2 weeks later, someone else put in a prompt and they got my article out. That's not how these tools work. Again, they mix the salad, they mix everything one with each other, so they don't copy and paste. They don't spit out information. So that's not so concerning. That being said, there were a few hackers who really understood LLMs very well. They were able, with the abstract of an article, they had the abstract of the article, they were able to recreate the remainder of the article using very advanced prompting. So if someone is really knows their computer science, really is a machine learning expert, and they have some information on the beginnings of materials, the beginning of your data set, the beginning of your article, and they work really, really hard, they in theory could hack the system and get information that you give out. Okay, it's very rare. I've only seen it happen a few times. I'm not necessarily saying you should, you shouldn't. You really have to think carefully about, what are the chances that, is there anyone else who knows anything about my research or who has part of it? And am I willing to take this risk, right, in sharing my information? And what would be the worst case scenario if it did get out, right? What would happen then? Keep in mind that hacks could happen to any company, right? This isn't just a problem that has to do with AI. It's any company in the world could be hacked and someone could get your information. But we have to think about what the levels of trust are. We need to ask our institutions what they're willing to accept. As we mentioned before, if your field is very, very niche and uses very, very specific terms, and there's only a few people in the world that use these terms, it could be that there's a greater risk. You're at greater risk because there's less for the large language models to build off of when they're giving their answers. Okay? So that's in terms of whether the information will show up online. As I mentioned, there's all sorts of tools online where you're giving your information away all the time. So anyone who writes on LinkedIn, right, you should know they're using your information to train their AI models. So it's not just a question for AI tools, it's a question for all tools. Obviously, the more sensitive the information you upload, the more you're going to want to be careful about what the privacy policies are of those tools, right? So I would say that a tool for finding literature, right, like deep research, I'm not really giving away so much. I'm giving away my research question, right? That's basically what I'm giving away. I'm not giving away any data. Whereas a tool like Julius, where I'm uploading my data, right, that's a bigger risk, right? So I would hope that the tool would take more precautions and be safer, but you have to check each tool for its own. Now, I want to, in addition to issues of privacy and confidentiality, which are obviously critical, right, and need to be discussed with the research security officers at your institutions, I want to show you some embarrassing cases of some embarrassing uses of ChatGPT, which I want to make sure you don't fall into this trap, okay? Because these are cases where people have used AI tools very irresponsibly, I would say, and their careers have really been cut short as a result. And you definitely don't want to be that. Now, again, I'm all for using AI tools, but be smart about it, okay? And don't do things that are silly. So let me show you the first silly example. The first one, this is an article that was published in a journal called Surfaces and Interfaces. It's an Elsevier journal. It was published by 5 Chinese authors. And if you look carefully, I don't know if you can see it here. I can try to make it, no, it won't get too big. But I'll read it to you. The introduction of the paper starts, "Certainly, here is a possible introduction for your topic." Okay, now anyone who uses GPT knows that that is clearly a line that was copied and pasted directly from ChatGPT, which begs the question, how much of the rest of this article was copied and pasted directly from ChatGPT? Right? Was it even read? Did the authors of the article even read the article? It also begs additional questions. Where were the reviewers? Where were the editorial team? Where was the proofreaders? Those are big questions, which I don't have the answers to, but definitely very embarrassing. Elsevier had to retract this article and didn't look very good for them or for the authors. Okay, so this is not a situation you want to be in. Even if you're using it responsibly, be very careful that you're not making really silly mistakes like that. And this is the first line of the article, by the way, so it's a pretty bad mistake. Here's another example. If anyone here works with rats in a lab, or even if you don't, if you've ever seen a rat, you will know that this is not a rat. This is definitely not the anatomy of a rat, and it should not be published in an academic journal. However, this image was published in Frontiers, in a journal. It is not in any way scientific or anatomical, and for whatever reason, it was published. It's total nonsense. Looks bad for the author. I don't know why the author would submit such a ridiculous photo. I don't know why the publisher would publish it, but it just comes to show you how much things can get in. And these are very obvious examples, but there's a lot of more subtle examples as well of really bad and embarrassing mistakes that people make. So again, it's not a matter of covering your tracks if you're not doing something wrong. It's a matter of being very careful when you're using, you have to be double as careful when you use AI, that you're not introducing new problems or new errors to the research that you're trying to publish. Here is a post from LinkedIn. I don't know if you can read it from where you are. Let's see here. Okay, that's weird. I don't know if you can read it from there, but this is a peer review that one of my colleagues on LinkedIn received this week from a journal. And when you start reading it, it sounds reasonable. It says the abstract should be improved. It should also have numerical data. Number 2, keywords should include relevant words that capture the essence of your research. They need to be listed in an appropriate order of importance. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, this is about as generic as a review can get. It's almost meaningless because it's so generic. Pretty clear that what happened in this case is someone submitted an article, the article went out for review, the reviewer agreed, and for some reason, instead of bothering to do a review, just wrote into GPT, please write me a review. And this is what came out. The review is totally meaningless, it's not helpful at all. Again, how this got by the editorial team, I can't really explain, it's pretty embarrassing. It's not a situation that any of us want to be in. So it's smart use is really critical. I gave here, and again, I'll send the slides around so you can have this. It's a checklist for the ethical checklist for AI in EU grant writing. So this is the only checklist that I've seen that actually you can go through and say, okay, here's number 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's how I make sure that I'm using these tools responsibly. But this is for grant writing, but I think you can use it. Most of it is applicable for article writing as well. So just make sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. This topic came up earlier, I don't remember who mentioned it, but about our language, right? Which words are used. So this was a really interesting study that was done about words that are used in academic articles, and somehow, ever since the end of 2022, certain words have shot up dramatically. So, for example, the use of the word meticulously, right? I meticulously studied this topic. Now, technically in English, that's correct. There's nothing wrong with using that word. But it's just weird. It's just not a word that you ordinarily see in science, and then all of a sudden it's appearing everywhere. And why is that? That's because more people are using GPT to write their papers, and certain words are being used more than others. Now, this isn't a problem per se. You can use the word meticulously. There's nothing wrong with that word. But you do want to be careful If your article is filled with words that like a native English speaker would say, that's weird. After a certain amount of time, we might feel like, you know what, this feels like AI just wrote their paper. I don't even know if I can trust it, right? And that's the biggest word that we want to stick with is trust, right? So we want to make sure that if we are using AI, it doesn't feel like, you know, I'm reading a bot's writing. It needs to feel like I'm reading my own. There's big issues of bias. So I'll get an example that I'll show you, and this is pretty ridiculous. There's big issues in bias both with text and with images. So this was a very embarrassing scenario that happened to Google, where basically Google was accused of basically if you were to try to put in the words Army General, the only image that you could get out is a white male. So there was no way to get a female Army General and no way to get a general that was of color. So Google got a lot of people gave a lot of flack and gave a hard time to Google. So Google said, don't worry, we will change it. We'll make everybody more diverse and we'll make sure that there's a greater range of representation. They did that, they announced it, they published, they launched their new updated version. Someone then Googled, using Gemini, they asked, please make me an image of a Nazi soldier, and it gave them a diverse Asian-looking Nazi soldier. So that also, you know, I think we can all understand the problematics of that as well. So it's actually not an easy. It sounds like it's an easy problem to understand. It's actually not an easy problem from a technological standpoint to solve, right? How do you kind of represent? How do you make sure there's proper representation? Especially in images, it's very pronounced. They had the same issue with like George Washington, that like you couldn't make a white George Washington for a while. It's a bit of a messy area, but just the reason I'm bringing this up is not to give Google a hard time, but rather to say, although I have no problem with that, but is rather to say there's bias that are baked into these tools. It could be that bias is because of the algorithms. It could be the bias is the content that it consumed, right? That content was very biased in all sorts of ways. So we need to be aware of that. It's not like whatever we're getting because it's from a bot and not from a human is any less biased. Just the opposite. It could be even more biased. So we need to be aware. As you already, I'm sure, know, it can make up citations, which look very real. There have already been, right, this is a lawyer who got into serious trouble in court where he came in with a whole brief, represented his client, and at the end the judge looked up the citations and realized they were entirely made up, and he was almost lost his job. Okay, we'll skip the AI. We talked about AI detection. This is what I talked about before. This is from a study about the accuracy of AI detection tools. So as I mentioned before, none of the tools that were studied in this passed the 80%. Since then, I think we've gotten to 90%, but it's still not high enough to be trusted. Sorry, I'm just running through because I know we're running into time. The question of AI as plagiarism. So my opinion, okay, and this is just my opinion, and unfortunately there aren't guidelines on this yet. My opinion is that use the same rules that you would use for a normal plagiarism for AI. What I mean by that is if 100% of the document is written entirely by AI and you didn't edit it at all, in my opinion, that's plagiarism, okay? The fact that I stole it from a robot and not from a person, okay, but it's still not mine and I'm passing it on as if it's mine. If I've used paragraphs here or there and I've edited those paragraphs, or I wrote something and it edited me, great. I don't think that's plagiarism at all. I don't see that as a problem. There's middle gray areas, right? What if I wrote half of it and the bot wrote half of it? So those are kind of the questionable areas. Regardless, what we need to be doing is we need to be transparent. What the journals require of us is to say, I used this tool, here's where I used it, here's how I used it, okay, and here's why I used it. If we're honest and transparent about how we're using the AI tools, the publishers are okay with it, okay? If we start trying to hide it, and then one of the reviewers says, this feels like it's AI, that's where we start getting into trouble. So just be honest, be transparent, and it's okay. Meaning, most researchers are not native English speakers, so if you're using AI to help you with editing and revising and writing, I think that's fine. We just need to be honest about it and straightforward about it in our use. I'll finish off with the last story, which we don't want to run into, which is a professor who gave his students he basically asked the students to do a writing assignment. He told them they are not allowed to use AI. He then decided when he got all the assignments in, all the work in, he then uploaded those to GPT and he said, did you write these papers? And GPT said, yes, of course I did. They're wonderful. Even though they had not, most of the students had not used GPT. The professor then went on to fail his entire class. He gave them all zeros, which meant some of them were not going to finish college. And it created a very big problem because the students said, we did not use these tools. What are you talking about? So the point is that if we're going to use the tools, and I hope that you do, I really do hope that you do, because I think you see the power of them. Use them, but be smart about them. Double check your work, be transparent and honest, and continue learning. Continue doing things like today. You don't need me. It's enough that, you get together with your colleagues and every week someone else is presenting on a tool that they played around with, experimented with. This went well, this didn't go well, and from there you can learn and grow. Thank you very, very much to everyone for all your attention. I know it was a long day. There was a lot of information. I speak quickly. If there's anything that that you want to, everything is recorded. So I imagine, Eka, right? Everyone will be able to see the recording. So if you want to play it back for yourself in another 2 weeks when you have something coming up that you want to practice, I encourage you to do so. Looking forward to continuing our interaction over the next 2 days.